And pageantry of college football all season long, free on TuneIn.
Stock markets here in Europe are open for action, a brand new trading week. And one of the big fears as investors start to move into the session today is what's happening on the trade front. There are enormous concerns that the Chinese might be narrowing the focus for discussions on Thursday and Friday this week to take off the table industrial subsidies. But that is just a report so far. So the market is trying to second guess what that could mean. One playbook is that there's now what's called sequencing, where you see in a trade discussion, a little bit like Brexit and with the US-Japanese deal, that perhaps there will be an easy deal first or an interim deal before some of the harder issues are then tackled. Just one issue for investors to digest. The other is what we saw in markets on Friday as Wall Street popped, not reflected on this benchmark trade that we've got first up this morning. And we saw some of the strong action in the Friday session here in Europe, as well as investors effectively saw a payrolls report that showed a Goldilocks situation. Jobs still created, not quite the headline number anticipated. We've got about 136,000 jobs, so slightly softer than the number expected. But the unemployment rate dropped and there was no sign of wage pressure. So a fairly good report card for some investors. But cautious day of trade this morning. Perhaps some of this is in what has been a volatile trading month so far, and with risk events around trade later this week, we're seeing a little bit of this green and red being matched fairly evenly at the start of the Monday session. Individual sectors, if we just take a look on Wall Street, we saw financials and energy, some of the big performers. Today, as we take a look at the trade, we've got travel and leisure at the top, a little bit more red than green at this stage. Autos at the bottom, with every stock in that basket trading weaker, about 0.5% plus in negative territory for the basket. Peugeot, Fiat, some of the stocks moving south. Basic resources, fairly weak outing at the beginning of this session too. Banks trading lower. Lots of report cards from this sector. SocGen talking about the impact of negative rates, pushing it back against that. HSBC with a report circling that another 10,000 jobs could be on the block. Closely watching that today. Oil and gas. This is a bit of a reaction to the trade concerns. Investors fearing that if there is some pushback around these trade discussions from the Chinese, that could be a negative for the oil play this week. Telcos trading a little bit lower. Retail stocks down by almost 0.25%. Ocado, Morrison, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Carrefour, some of the big supermarkets in that basket trading weaker. Media stocks, technology, insurance, all below the flat line. You can see just a little bit more red. That has the march on this board at the start of the session. Household goods trying to move into the green. Travel and leisure just giving up that leadership position, but still one of the firmer ones this morning. That is the flip-sided, slightly lower oil. TUI at the top, Air France, Lufthansa, some of the better performers. Food and drink trades higher, but healthcare right in the top spot. We may see reaction to that 0.5% plus gain for the Swiss market in Zurich. Let's switch over the charts and just take a look. And you can see Swiss stocks trading in the green, 0.2%, reflecting some of those gains in the defensives. But elsewhere, we are trading weaker right across the board for the FTSE, trading below 7,150 this morning. It's dropped another 12 points. A lot of Brexit developments closely watched as investors trying to work out whether we are going to have another delay to this October 31st deadline. The French market is down more, though. It is one of the weakest performers on the boards, down about 1/3%, matched by Italian stocks. Better performance for the German stock market and also for Italy at the start. Let's dive into that report around HSBC, which is reportedly planning to slash up to 10,000 jobs in a cost-cutting drive. According to the FT, interim CEO Noel Quinn is working with CFO Ewan Stevenson to make savings in each of the bank's 4 major units. The job cuts will reportedly focus on high-paid roles and will come on top of some 4,000 redundancies announced in August. HSBC declined to comment on the report. The stock price, you can see, moving south by almost 0.7%. A US court has postponed a lawsuit against Bayer over its glyphosate-based weed killer Roundup until further notice. It is the latest trial facing the German chemicals giant to be delayed as a mediator works to negotiate an out-of-court settlement between Bayer and over 18,000 US plaintiffs seeking damages over alleged cancer risk caused by the herbicide. The stock popping 1.6%, and you can see now over the course of the last 3 months, the stock is up 4.3%. AMS. So we're talking about this story today with one of the major players, and AMS has failed in its 4.5 billion euro takeover bid for Osram. The Austrian shipmaker secured only 51.86% of Osram shares, short of the 62.5% threshold required for an all-cash acquisition. But AMS is still aiming for a deal and said it will explore strategic options to acquire the German lighting group. And you can see Osram shares on the back foot today and 3.7% lower.
Karen, why don't I just carry on where I've just finished off with our guests around the set. David Miller's joined us, Investment Director at Quilter Cheviot, and of course Sean Corrigan from Cantillon is with us as well. Karen, I need to apologise that I didn't know the film Captains Courageous, which is the title of one of your latest fund manager diary pieces as well. Captain's Courageous. It was a Spencer Tracy movie, yeah?
Spencer Tracy.
I thought I knew all Spencer Tracy movies. 1937,
so even before your time.
No, but I was watching all the Ming the Merciless and what was that? Flash Gordon stuff from the 30s. I should have watched that as well.
You should have. It's a good film, but...
so tell us why that film is relevant to your diary piece.
It was only because seeing Donald and Boris together in New York when they were both having a bad day in the office, and it just struck me that it just reminded me of that title, Captains Courageous.
These Captains Courageous, Mr. Trump and Mr. Johnson, are they relevant on a daily basis to our viewers in terms of our viewers who are looking at market participation?
Okay, that's a really important question because we were able to ignore them for a long, long time, but gradually they're sort of getting to us. So I think the answer to your question is at the moment, yes, because I think confidence has been ebbing over the last few months, and I think it's down to trade wars, it's down to wonderful. I'm now three of us together.
I'm trying to channel my inner Spencer Tracy, and I'm not really seeing it with those two gentlemen.
But they're sort of getting to us. So Brexit and the trade wars, it's beginning to affect confidence, and it has been affecting confidence in business for a while now, but it's sort of ebbing into the consumers, and that would be the critical thing. If the US consumers start to feel cautious, then I think it's a different game.
We've got a 3.5% unemployment rate in the state. Why shouldn't they be confident in their own personal balance sheet?
Well, broadly speaking, they are. If you've got a job and you're being paid reasonably, that is the right answer. But what you do see is I'll give you just a statistic. So US auto sales, the contracts are now, a third of them are now 6-year contracts. There's a sense that they want to delay the replacement cycle. And I think if I was looking for evidence that people are getting more cautious, it would be that sort of thing.
That's not bringing job security necessarily, though, is it, having those sort of contracts? Because you've seen in many consumer stateside go through a shedding process post-financial crisis. Many have got debt. So contracts don't really provide job security.
Yeah, they don't. I think it's what I'm getting at is that people are looking sensibly at their own risk-reward balance, and they're thinking perhaps there's a bit more risk. I have a job, but will I have a job in the future? And they're making a judgment that they may not want to really get involved in a big ticket item and do it regularly, which is, in confident times, you replace your car every 2 or 3 years, you see.
Can we talk about the big issues then? Because tariff discussions are taking place later this week around the trade discussion. By the end of the week, we might know whether a Brexit deal is going to be possible. Two major risks coming for the markets at possibly the same time. Now, do you think anything's going to get solved? We're going to have positive news on any of these fronts?
Well, that's the problem at the moment. We've got these binary events out there that we can't really price, we can't judge, and that's why I think volatility has been relatively low, all things considered, and why a lot of valuations, a lot of things like exchange rates are essentially middle ground in quite a wide spread. So maybe we will get something, but I thought it was interesting overnight that the Chinese are saying, well, actually, we don't want to do a deal with you, Mr. Trump, even though quite clearly he does want to do a deal before 2020 and the election cycle kicks in. As for Brexit, I think anyone's guess on where we're going with that one.
There's a lot in there. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that clearly the whole purpose of economic activity is to have things to be consumed. So you want people to be in a position where they can consume them one way or another, hopefully out of their income rather than their capital or necessarily by always piling on more debt. But if we say that it's spreading from business, well, that's kind of the natural progression, isn't it? The business is the one where there's most businesses rely on discretionary spending, and a biggest proportion of all that spending is by other businesses. So they filter into one another. And of course, if you're in a business where everybody knows that sales aren't coming in, that orders aren't coming in, when you then participate in your own consumer survey, it's not really surprising that then you begin to reflect this. So yeah, there is this question. I mean, I showed you some bits and pieces in the picture there. America has clearly slowed dramatically from last year, 18 months ago. There's no two ways around it. Whether that was one-off stimulus from tax cuts and fiscal expansion or whatever, it has slowed. It is not yet, except with one or two sectors, contracting. But that slowdown, that deceleration itself is enough to have people beginning to wonder and beginning to worry. So yes, I'd agree with that.
Is that why Germany refuses to, at the moment, ostensibly, either at a national level or indeed at an individual level, to spend money? Because they are incredibly concerned at what they're seeing elsewhere. They're concerned at what they're seeing in their manufacturing sector now, and they just won't spend the money, even if a lot of people are saying that's an act of self-harm.
I think it's on top of those things, which are right. I think it's history as well. I think they remain concerned that printing to spend is inflationary.
100 years ago now, or give or take, about 96 years ago, the Weimar Republic.
It's interesting that that has been the agenda for all that period, but just slowly, and the reason we're talking about it today, there's a sense that there might be a movement on this, and there might be a realization that they do need to spend just a little bit more to stimulate activity, because unless they help themselves, nobody else is going to help them out.
So you're a student of this. Can they spend their way out of this?
Well, the government can spend its way and generate a short-term boost to growth, but I mean, why has Europe got a structural problem? Because too much of the activity is not in the vibrant private sector. It's either it's government-led, government-regulated, but do we really want more of these people on top of us? So we get this Keynesian kick, and it'll look great through an electoral cycle, but is it going to solve Europe's longer-term problems? I mean, the mantra has always been, we do this weak monetary policy in order for you to have time to put in place structural changes. Well, the structural changes everybody kind of knows, but no politician's ever going to sign up for them because they're unpopular in the short run. The whole history of Europe, my whole working lifetime, has been it's only in crisis that the government takes the hard decisions. And if the European Central Bank is going to prevent any crisis, they're not going to take any hard decisions.
Which means they need to save that big bazooka for an absolute crisis again. So what we're talking about here is an economy that will not use fiscal stimulus until we see a deep downturn, not something just caused by a trade war that has an impact, but a global meltdown, another global financial crisis is when that tool is going to be used, right?
Well, we sort of hope not. I mean, but if you're an investment manager...
not, but that's what it's going to be used for, right?
Well, I know, but I mean, investors and businesses can be contrarian in the way that they make decisions. They can go ahead of the change, but I think what you've described is exactly what happens in government, in politics, is that what is unacceptable to the electorate becomes acceptable only at times of crisis. Then things do start to move.
So I'm curious about what happens now on markets. And we were talking to Steve Schwartzman before about how you make money or don't lose money at this point. And it seems as though investors are still positioned around this barbell approach, trying to be a little bit risk on and trying to protect their capital at the other side. Is that going to be the right strategy for October? We've already seen it's been somewhat of a volatile month.
I was going to answer the question differently until you said October. So October...
Very short term at this point.
That's fine. The last quarter of the year is always a very tricky time because in October we have our optimistic forecasts from the beginning of this year evaporate into reality, and it's not until November, December that the optimists come out to talk about the new year. So we're going to have that volatility at a time when we've got these other binary events going on like Brexit and the trade war. So I think that is the issue in the short term. But I think the longer term issue, and I'm going to try and take you to it, is that the cost of money seems to be what matters. If interest rates, and this is what was happening Friday evening in the States, not very good numbers, indifferent numbers, let's have another rate cut, market picks up. And the cost of money has been cheap for 10 years and is still cheap.
When does, and I think we're going to look back at the markets again in a minute, when does this argument that bad data, and again, we've all oscillated with this. I mean, Karen, when you were at the wall, we were working out how long we've been in the market between us.
What number did you get to?
It's a little bit north of 100 years. It was, we were just thinking about that. We were slightly over 100 years. But when in this moment, this current thinking, does bad data not equal good news? Because at the moment, from what you were saying, the argument is bad data equals good news. But when that bad data gets to the point where corporate profits are affected, then bad data equals bad news. Are we anywhere near getting to that stage where bad data is bad news?
Well, we'll have a look, because I've been writing this weekly note for 5 years now. And what's quite clear from looking back at them is that in the vacuum before the quarterly company results, a lot of stories circulate which make us feel a little bit unhappy. Then the companies come through and they announce, on average, respectable numbers, making a profit, paying dividends, and everybody calms down.
We're calling you down so we can beat it. We're calling you down so we can beat it. That's the oldest trick in the book, isn't it?
But what happened for the 30th June numbers is they were going to be negative and they came through positive. Yeah. We all breathed a huge sigh of relief and had a good summer. Now we're coming up to the 30th September numbers. I think the answer to your question, if they're not good enough, if they're negative, which is what the forecast and the guidance is suggesting.
I was going to say numbers or outlook?
Numbers.
Numbers.
Actual numbers.
Sean, do you want a quick word on this before we get back to the wall?
End of the year, I agree. In the end of the year, there's a lot of herding because nobody wants to be short of what was the year's winners and nobody wants to be long on what was the year's losers. So it tends to be a market that accelerates its thing into the last bit of dying gasp of liquidity. So we were saying here that I think you mentioned that volatility is still pretty depressed. Wouldn't be a bad thing to maybe take some protection that way, even if it's bi-directional.
Own those straddles. We had a vol expert on Friday talking of volatility. Do you know, there was a great story, Karen, when Vodafone had its deepest travails about the dividend or what have you. I read a piece that said, now's the time to panic. And I remember us saying on air, what a load of rubbish. The stock was 129. Now, we don't pick stocks. We don't trade stocks, but we were right.
Right. Well, you were right in this case. So Vodafone stock today 157.48 on the back foot, but the ticker price are much higher than what Steve was talking about before. Vodafone is testing out open access radio technology in the UK that could lower the cost of making calls and accessing mobile data. The rollout of the new tech would see Vodafone challenge the large network equipment suppliers Huawei, Ericsson and Nokia. And you can see the impact on Nokia stock trading lower. Ericsson, though, still supported. Daimler today, it may have to recall as many as 260,000 of its Sprinter vans, according to reports in Germany. That's after Berlin's transport authority warned the vehicles may contain illegal engine software. It is the latest incident this year for Daimler, and the car maker issued a profit warning in June and agreed to pay an €870 million fine last month after it admitted to violating emission standards. The stock price, you can see for the last 3 months, trading down more than 11%. Big dip in Publicis shares today. They are down more than 3% and trading near the bottom of the French stock market after Morgan Stanley cut the stock to underweight and lowered the price target to €38 from €54. Just a quick line on this relates to what we've seen, the acquisition of Epsilon. That is the tech unit that they bought that was meant to help out the company's fortunes and investment in that, but also the mainstream operations impacting the stock price. Steve.
Thank you, Karen. Right, coming up on the show, put up or shut up. Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing faces a looming deadline to make a formal offer for the LSE. We are live outside the LSE with more after the break.
Now get greedy whenever you want. Subscribe to the American Greed.
Have you ever wondered what a shelf sounds like? How about a lamp? Well, it might just be louder and better than you think. The new Wi-Fi-enabled symphonic speaker range from IKEA and Sonos is here. So now you can find out for yourself. Shop in store or at ikea.co.uk and fill your home with feeling. IKEA, the wonderful everyday.
Right now, the future is being written by people like you. Creative thinkers, tech lovers, problem solvers. Are you going to stand by and watch? Well, show the world what you've got. Join others around the UK on an EY degree apprenticeship in digital and technology. And earn a salary working with exciting businesses while studying towards a degree. Don't let the future pass you by. Get involved. For more information and to apply, search EY Digital Apprentice.
Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. Brexit will bring changes that affect businesses in many ways, particularly if you buy from EU suppliers, sell to EU customers, provide services to EU clients, and receive customer data from other businesses in the EU. Businesses need to prepare. Find out how at gov.uk/Brexit. Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October.
The relaxing sound of fresh, cold running water. And you can have it in your kitchen. With amazing savings on Samsung fridge freezers at Currys PC World. Like the RB31 with its chilled water dispenser for only $399. Or upgrade to the Samsung RS8000 American-style fridge freezer with water and ice dispenser. A huge 609 litres of storage space. At just $1,049. How relaxing. At Currys PC World. Energy rating A+. T's and C's apply.
TuneIn puts you on the sideline for the 2019 college football season free all year long. With college football on TuneIn, hear the home and away call for more than 140 schools live, regular season matchups and rivalry games, conference championships and bowl games, the college football playoff.
The throw, he steps up, he's going deep down the right side. Andrews.
You can listen to it all for free.
The end zone, touchdown.
At home, on campus, or on the road, hear the excitement and pageantry of college football all season long free on TuneIn.
I want to take you to Metro Bank because we do have a bit of a pop in the share price today. In context, it comes after the stock has declined a fairly huge, mighty 62% down over the course of the last 3 months. And the movement today, 2.6%. This on a report in The Telegraph that founder Vernon Hill is looking for financial backers to help him buy the lender, taking it private. You may recall that he was one of the big headline moves last week in terms of CEO departures around his fortunes at the company. Meantime, let's move on to the LSE. It is crunch time for the Hong Kong exchanges in clearing as it faces a deadline later this week to make a formal bid for the London Stock Exchange or walk away from the deal. According to several reports, LSE investors want Hong Kong Exchange to raise its offer by up to 20% and sweeten the cash component of the agreement. The LSE has rejected the current deal, preferring a plan to buy Refinitiv for $27 billion. Let's get out to Juliana for more. Juliana, many investors looking for more cash, but the only problem is when some of these bids become unsustainable, and we know that there's been enormous pressure in Hong Kong lately with protesters. Does the Hong Kong Exchange have the firepower now to up a bid safely?
Karen, it's a very good question to be asking. And according to the Times reporting, they have heard that Hong Kong will increase their offer this week. And of course, Wednesday is the deadline to watch. Now, in terms of what the timing of this deal from Hong Kong's perspective, I know you guys raised earlier in the show the question of whether this is motivated by the unrest and the tensions that have developed between Beijing and Hong Kong. And obviously, mainland China is a hugely important part of the Hong Kong Exchange's business. And at a time when tensions are so high to parts of Asia, they are looking to diversify away, and this is where the LSE comes in. Now, in terms of what LSE shareholders are thinking, because at this point, this is the first question. We know that the LSE board has rejected flatly this offer from Hong Kong Exchange, and the Hong Kong side has, over the last 3 weeks, really engaged in a charm offensive of sorts, meeting with LSE shareholders. And we are looking at hopes that they raise their offer from around the 83.60 to the 90 to 100 pound level, just to be taken seriously. Now, they could also increase the cash component. As you mentioned, they're currently 3/4 of this deal is in Hong Kong shares. So, but again, that balance, as you say, is very difficult. And Hong Kong shares have not reacted well since the September 11th deadline. So they have pulled back. At the same time, LSE shares have accelerated. So putting Hong Kong in an even more difficult position, given they have shaved a good amount off of their market cap. Now, the FT is reporting that LSE shareholders have been unwilling to back its approach without a formal bid that includes changes on a range of issues, including governance. So this is another area which we could see adjusted if Hong Kong decides to come back with another offer this week. Now, two things I would leave you with in terms of questions beyond this immediate it the question of whether they come back with a new bid. One is, if this doesn't happen, what are Hong Kong's options then? Do they have a backup plan? Could another European exchange become a target, an alternative for them? And then on the LSE side, remember back in September when we were covering this story, we talked a lot about the possibility that a U.S. peer comes into the mix and looks at a bid for the LSE. So I wouldn't rule that out either. So those are two key questions we'll be asking. But of course, number one, front and center right now is, do we see Hong Kong come back before Wednesday? Guys?
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed for that, Juliana. Right, okay. Goodbye to the teens. Is this like saying goodbye to your youngsters when they're no longer teenagers and on the books, or is it actually talking about the market?
Or myself, of course. But I think what happened...
We're going back a little way, aren't we?
The arrogance of youth. On the 8th of September 2009, I published a note which had some 10-year forecasts in it.
Oh, yeah. How'd you get on?
Well, I thought only the honourable thing to do was to review it and write it up now, the end of the teens.
Did you back them if they went right? That's the other question.
Well, I think it's worked all right, if I say so myself.
Well done you.
I think what really mattered is that 10 years back, if you think about it, we come out of the credit crunch. It wasn't the disaster, but the sense was we were going to have QE, was going to lead to hyperinflation, or the whole thing would just all fall apart.
Yeah.
And the core of what I wrote 10 years back was that governments would continue to support, interest rates would stay low, and actually the disinflationary forces would outweigh the fact that we'd printed a few $1 trillion. And so basically, I think it did work, actually, because dividend-paying companies performed really well, and we've all carried on buying assets.
Can I just say it's worked so far? Is that really cynical of me?
Well, I think at the end of it, I've said I'm tempted to write for the next 10 years, but actually I think I'll just take a step back just to see how things work out.
Should we get Sean in? We've got a new wrinkle here forming his brow as furrows.
No. I was very much the same thing. If you go on my Twitter feed, Candle on CH, there's a pinned tweet at the top which has a graph that I did in February 2009, and it has, these are the three scenarios. We have the continued collapse, snowball Earth, and we end up in another Great Depression. Low probability, 10-15%. The monetary stimulus is overdone and everything accelerates. The other side, still relatively low, 20. And the other one was, we'll go from one cycle to another of trying to fix the problems, trying to keep money easy. We'll have anemic growth, stop-start. Every time the thing starts to slow down, everybody will be worried again. And a bit similar to this, we'll have this long anemic problem and we won't understand why. So I think, I think that obviously sensible minds and people with some experience and some insight kind of saw the same things, even though we're expressing it in slightly different language here.
Yeah. We've got about 30 seconds left. The chap in my ear keeps telling me. Any ideas of what you talked about, a volatile period last quarter of the year? What should our viewers do?
Well, I think it's a matter of active management. I think we will get, as I was saying, we'll get towards the company results. I think there will be some really good results coming through. Why not allocate to those? Because we're not going to be able to put money on deposit and earn a return. The bond markets are negative. It's an opportunity to make a return.
Constructive on the stock market.
Yeah.
Here's to the next 10 years. I'm sure we'll see you before then. David Miller, thank you very much indeed for that. Investment Director at Quilter Cheviot. And thanks for the tip on Captain's Courageous. Can't believe there's a Spencer Tracy film I haven't seen out there. Coming up on the show, with Italy set to unveil its latest budget later this month, we'll take a look at the challenges facing the country's new coalition government, including what does Renzi do? More after the break.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like online skills tests, which let a candidate show that they are the right hire. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its symbols when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are online skills tests.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring. Visit Indeed.com/try today to try skills tests for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
If you're collecting your prescription, don't assume you can claim it for free. Not all benefits entitle you to free prescriptions. And if you claim when you're not entitled, you could face a penalty charge of up to £100. Thankfully, there's a simple way to find out if you should be paying. Search Check Before You Tick online and use our eligibility checker to find out if your benefits mean you can claim for free. Or you can ask your pharmacy team. So always remember to check before you tick. This was brought to you by the NHS.
It's never nice missing out. But millions are doing just that by having a current account that doesn't pay them any interest on their hard-earned money. TSB
TSB is here to help. They offer interest to all their Plus account customers for no monthly fee. So if you're one of the millions of people who are missing out, talk to TSB. Terms and conditions apply.
The 1304 LNER train, Coach C. Taking aunties with cold hands to nephews with warm cheeks in Edinburgh. Remorseful revellers back to their beds in Leeds. Business mums gliding over the Forth Bridge towards a door in Toddlers in Newcastle. And a band heading to London to our group of strangers in a tiny pub. This is us. These are our journeys. This is our LNER.
You're 169 in the queue.
I proposed on the 169. She got for the next stop.
Oh, you're my 169th greatest lover.
The number 169 never screamed going places until now. Get the Toyota Aygo X-Play for only £169 deposit, then £169 a month with 0% APR representative. Just go. Aygo.
0% APR representative on new sales of Aygo X-Play over 48 months. £169 per month. Customer deposit of £169 when proposed and approved via Access Toyota by 31st of October 2019. £3,487 and 50p optional final payment. Subject to status to over 18s. Indemnities may be required. Conditions apply. Toyota Financial Services.
The calm before the storm, investors turning their attention to US-China trade talks amid a report Beijing is looking to narrow the scope of any deal. HSBC is reportedly set to slash up to 10,000 jobs as the lender looks to cut costs under the new interim CEO, Noel Quinn. Buyer shares ticking higher after another trial over the Roundup weed killer is delayed. In a sign the German chemicals giant is getting closer to an out-of-court settlement. And AMS fails in its €4.5 billion takeover bid of Osram, sending shares in the German lighting group lower. But Osram's CFO tells us the company is open to collaboration with the Austrian chipmaker.
Markets here in Europe have been trading for half an hour so far. We have seen improvement from a very flat open in the first few minutes of trade. Investors got a couple of themes on their minds. The non-farm payrolls report in the States, it was an interesting one to digest. A bit of a Goldilocks one where we had the unemployment rate pull down to a low 3.5%. We've not seen that since 1969, but no sign of a break at inflation with a very flat pace of wages growth by the hour. So investors taking that as a positive, and you saw a big pop on the major markets stateside. Now, as we start out a brand new trading week, investors have been served up a report just ahead of trade talks later this week between the US and China that everybody's been counting down to, that maybe the Chinese are seeking to limit the items of discussion and taking off the table industrial subsidies. So that's just creating a few jitters early on. But you can see now modest trade as we push throughout the early part of the session, about 1/3%. There's a bit more green starts to march onto the boards. Let's take a look at the sectors, because by sectors there was more red ink than green at the start. That's starting to switch over as media pops into the green, insurance, household goods, all trading in the green. Patches of red around auto still very weak showing from the start. Banks trading down by about 1/3. That's where we're watching closely for any confirmation of this report that's been circling from HSBC about another 10,000 jobs potentially being on the block. Healthcare performing nicely. You can see gains of about 1%. In terms of individual stocks, here's how it plays out across the board. If you take a look at the big names to the upside and big names to the downside and individual stock level, if we can switch over these boards for you and show you eventually, or I can just keep talking through the sectors, what we've got by stocks. London Petroleum, 3% in the green. Wirecard trading up by 2.7%. In terms of the weaker ones, Carnival, it is lower. Publicis on the back of some concerns around margins with further investment requirements at Publicis. Travis Perkins trades down 3.5%. And Osram, that's the big one we've been talking about today, as AMS has failed to get its deal pushed through. And now there's said to be a further dialogue that the company wants to have with Osram. Steve.
Thank you very much indeed. Here's a statement. Italy needs to push for structural reforms. I mean, it's a statement of our times. We could have said this any time in the last I guess 20 years. But anyway,
It's Edward Gibbon, actually.
Edward Gibbon, yes.
Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire.
Oh, yeah, so we're talking significantly before Risorgimento, then, yes, and Dennis Mac Smith, which is a seminal work. Italy needs to... He went back a little bit further in time than I did. Italy needs to push for structural reforms to boost growth and bring down its output gap. That's according to our next guest, who adds that Rome's upcoming budget will challenge the solidity of the country's new coalition government. Brunello Rosa is the CEO and head of research at Rosa and Rubini Associates and joins us around the desk with more. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you guys.
What's different about the stuff I just read? It needs structural reforms. It's going to challenge the solidity of the government, and then obviously going back to the Roman Empire times. I actually just went back to Cavour, but it still went a little bit further than that.
Yes.
We know it needs reforms. We know it needs structural reforms. We know it has a whole lot of issues. Why would now be any different from previously in terms of getting the government of the day to do those reforms?
Of course, it's always a challenge, has always been and will always be, especially as long as political stability is not there and seems a public good that is not easily available in Italy. So every government needs to face this challenge of introducing reforms that increase potential output. The last government, the Conte one, in fact, went a bit in the opposite direction, the counter-reform of pensions, so to speak, the quota 100. To some extent, even the citizenship income, some closures, or partial closures of shops on Sundays and so on, they were all steps in the wrong direction, so to speak. This government has made a statement of being closer to European rules, so to speak, and also a bit more in favor of structural reforms. The cut of the tax wedge is a step in the right direction. The potential funding of nursery as childcare to increase female labor force participation is a step in the right direction. These are minimal steps that needs to be implemented over time.
Forgive me on this one, but I mean, it's been a couple of weeks since I saw you in Como, where we saw a lot of very interesting people talking about what Italy does next. But isn't there already like a 20-25 billion euro black hole because they don't want to have the mandated VAT increases? And if they take that off the table, because you've got a centre-left stroke, fairly left-wing coalition going on here as well, then straight away there's a 20 billion euro hole. So it's lovely that Gualtieri is an ex-Parliament, European Parliament man. It's lovely that Gentiloni is on message as the commissioner from Italy as well. But the fact remains is they've already given themselves a massive black hole.
It is true, they start from a very difficult position, and almost the entirety of the budget is devoted to, in fact, prevent the increase of VAT. 23 billion out of 29 are devoted just to that. And the coverage of that is difficult. Partially will be from an increase in the deficit, and partially from the fight to tax evasion. Both of them are not exactly structural ways of...
Oh, come on, Brunello, you live and breathe this. When hasn't an Italian, and if I may add that, a Greek government come to power with the line, we're going to get the money from clamping down on tax evasion? I heard it from Tremonti in 2011. I've heard it from Papa Constantinou in 2011 and beyond. You keep hearing the same line, but it never seems to happen.
It is not factually true, sorry to say that. Yeah. In 2001, the sums recovered by tax evasion were around 3 billion a year. Now is around 16 billion plus others that have been recovered over time. Now, it's not enough. We are talking about 109 billion a year evaded.
Right. So we are talking 14% of it being
exactly, is a fraction. But things are going somehow in the right direction, in the sense that there's at least now the understanding that unless you really tackle this issue, you're not going to find anything of the programs that you might have in mind.
Comes in, this is a demographic issue as well, so they've got to tread very lightly as well, because as I understand, and I learn a lot when I go to Italy, and I really try and listen, this is a southern Italy problem, very much so, which people are very concerned about because of the demographics of what's going on in southern Italy and the extra pressures that southern Italy has got because of the migrant crisis as well. So they've got to tread very carefully on this one.
Sure. Demographics is tricky everywhere in Italy. Birth rates are low also in the north. The problem is that the immigration rate, people that talk a lot about immigration, there's a tragedy about immigration. The brain drain from the south, but also from the north, is huge. We did a study, we are talking about 125,000 people per year, mostly among the most educated, leaving the country to go abroad. And this has been going on for years. We are now talking about 5.5 million Italians living abroad. And these are only those registered. Imagine the others. So we are talking about a huge structural issue. Unless that is reversed, Italy is never going to find its way to grow.
Well, yeah, I mean, I very much share those sentiments, but this is an issue here where it's the usual story. The government is trying to find ways to finance more spending. But the problem is that they've already plucked the chicken to the point that it's practically naked and shivering, which is why tax evasion is an industry, and why so many people are leaving abroad, and so they're escaping the clause. So if you continue hacking away at the golden goose, eventually there are no more eggs. So we were saying earlier that the historical thing in not just Italy but many European countries is you only really tackle those issues in one big lump when everything else is falling in on you. I mean, the Maastricht treaties and the crisis in 92, 94, 98, as we all got ready for European monetary union, they were hard times for people in the country, but there were some genuine reforms put in place because they had to be. Yeah. Now we've had this 10 years of the central bank keeping everything going, and the implicit criticism here, which has a certain kernel of truth, is that Draghi's policy is to keep Italy afloat, primarily.
The German banks that are financing Italy and something.
Well, okay,
have I got back a stage?
But this is the attack from the north. But with that, it's an exaggeration, but there's a certain kernel of truth in there that there hasn't needed to be reform, so the politicians can always manage to patch another coalition, tinker here, put some taxes there, spend. We need more than this, surely, Brunello.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, as long as the Italian political system remains so fragmented and unstable, people will have really hard time trusting the government, trusting the state. If there's no trust, fiscal compliance becomes extremely difficult because people just try to defend themselves to some extent. Then there are, of course, those who are too smart, so to speak, those who are criminals. So these are all the various shades, if you want, of tax evasion. Italy just needs to recover 20% of it, and half of its fiscal problems will be resolved. Italy baseline fiscal deficit for this year is 1.4%. Is very, very low, 1.4%, the baseline, if you activated the VAT increase. Italy primary surplus is between 1.5% and 2%, has been so for the last 20 plus years. So Italy fiscal problem is not as big as it seems. The problem is debt servicing costs and the legacy of debt. Yeah. But debt is like having a mortgage and no job to service it.
Right, but I mean, we've seen costs come down. If you look at the BTP, that has dropped quite an extraordinary level from the 3.7 and some of the height of the fears right down to about 0.9%. Well, my question is what happens next? Christine Lagarde is coming in as thought to be a lobbyist for more spending across economies, but also a lobbyist for reforms. Do you think anything changes when you've got someone external to the country who's not an Italian arguing for change versus Mario Draghi, who was pointed out by some as a traitor by some Italians, and then for many people in Europe they thought he was too close to Italy. I mean, he couldn't really win either way. Do you think Christine Lagarde gets more traction with her bid to try and change Italy?
I think Draghi was balanced in his assessment and actually had to step in to do the job that the politicians across Europe were not doing.
But he's no politician and he wasn't successful.
The ECB kept the European economy afloat at it is most difficult time. We are talking about a continent that has been flirting with stagnation/recession for the last 10 years plus, and yet the fiscal stance remains neutral at best, most of the time restrictive, also because those who have fiscal space, such as Germany, don't use it. Now, Lagarde is probably going to adopt a line that is very much in continuity with what Draghi has done. It's going to be quite hard for her to deviate much from what Draghi has done. Whether she can push Italy to adopt reforms, that's harder to say. Let's put it this way. Italians only do reforms when they have their back to the wall. But Draghi has always thought the opposite. Let's give them some space, and with this space, reforms could come.
Very quick question. I've got 20 seconds left. Who's the biggest threat to this government, Salvini or Renzi?
They are both challenges of different sorts. Salvini, of course, is the one that wants to come back to power. But so is Renzi.
I was going to say.
But Renzi has no incentive of pulling the plug of this government.
So why has he already kind of started making so much noise at such an early stage of the inception of this coalition, if he doesn't want this coalition to fail?
No, because he has just formed his own breakaway party. He wants this party to grow, to be visible, and making sure that all the right things get his mark on it, and so he can claim it was his victory. So of course, it's a dangerous game, because this government needs time and patience to amalgamate the PD and the Five-Star who have fought each other for years, and now they are trying to govern together.
They don't have a lot in common, do they?
Exactly.
We'll leave it there. Nice to see you.
Thanks a lot.
Not quite as nice surroundings as when we last saw each other.
Thanks a lot.
Brunello Rosa, who is the CEO and head of research at Rosa and Rubini Associates. One of these days, I'll get a squawk on the road there. You'll love it. It's very you, Karen.
Coming up on the show, another whistleblower steps forward as the pressure rises on President Trump over a phone call with his Ukrainian counterpart.
And we've got pictures now of yet more protests. They look very peaceful protests at the moment in Hong Kong at a commercial centre in the east of Hong Kong Island, where pro-democracy demonstrators have gathered to sing songs and chant slogans.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like online skills tests, which let a candidate show that they are the right hire. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its cymbals when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are online skills tests.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring. Visit Indeed.com/try today to try skills tests for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
To succeed in small business, you need technology that runs efficiently. When you partner with a Dell Small Business Technology Advisor, you get advice, one-on-one partnership, and tailored productivity solutions, including computers with Intel Core processors, servers, storage, networking, plus industry-leading monitors and accessories. It's how they help your small business make the most of every minute. To speak with an advisor today, call 0800 085 4878. That's 0800 085 4878.
Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. Brexit will bring changes that affect businesses in many ways, particularly if you buy from EU suppliers, sell to EU customers, provide services to EU clients, and receive customer data from other businesses in the EU. Businesses need to prepare. Find out how at gov.uk/Brexit. Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October.
The nights have started to draw in. And at DFS, we know that can only mean one thing. Everyone will want to spend more time at home, getting nice and cozy. You can't beat it. That's why all our sofas are handmade to order, and many are guaranteed to be delivered in time for Christmas. So you can look forward to cozying up this winter, knowing your new sofa won't let you down. DFS.
Hi, this is Brian Weber, host of NFL First and Goal, every Sunday, kicking off at 1 Eastern, only on TuneIn Premium. Be sure to listen this Sunday for the ultimate football fan experience, featuring 7 hours of commercial-free coverage of every scoring play around the NFL.
Want to know what's happening in right now? The latest headlines are just a tap away with Fox News Talk on TuneIn. When news breaks, get up-to-the-minute coverage on developing stories from around the world. Plus, hear all the Fox shows you watch on your TV. Listen to Fox News Talk around the clock on TuneIn. Make sure to follow TuneIn today, so you're always in the know. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Just search @TuneIn.
A second whistleblower has reportedly come forward with direct knowledge of President Trump's dealings with Ukraine. The person is said to be already working with intelligence officials. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell filed this report.
Tonight, a second witness is challenging President Trump's Ukraine call and the foreign help he sought to investigate the Bidens. The new whistleblower is cooperating with the intelligence community Inspector General Michael Atkinson, but is not expected to file a separate complaint. According to legal sources, this government official has first-hand knowledge that supported the first whistleblower, who submitted this 9-page document August 12th. First-hand knowledge is critical because whistleblower 1 was not a direct witness, but claimed to be informed by more than half a dozen U.S. officials. For Democrats, this new whistleblower could aid their impeachment inquiry.
We will want to hear from that person. People who are in the very core of all of these events are saying this can't happen.
President Trump taunted on Twitter. They are going to the bench, and another whistleblower is coming in from the deep state. Keep them coming. But party unity has a few splinters. 3 GOP senators, Mitt Romney, Ben Sasse, and now Susan Collins, criticized President Trump for urging China to investigate Joe Biden and son Hunter's business there. The Bidens deny any wrongdoing. Collins is considered vulnerable for re-election in Maine.
I thought the president made a big mistake by asking China to get involved in investigating a political opponent. That's completely inappropriate.
NBC's Kelly O'Donnell reporting there. The US jobs report slightly dampened expectations of a rate cut from the Fed this month. However, the market still sees an 80% chance of a quarter-point move. Kansas City Fed President Esther George stuck to her hawkish stance this weekend, saying concerns about low inflation are unnecessary. But several of her colleagues on Friday seemed open to the possibility of another cut.
The job growth is pretty consistent with trend job growth. I mean, still above trend job growth, but slowing from last year. And, you know, coming into this year, we knew that things were going to be slowing down because we were above trend last year, pretty strong economy last year. Really now, it's really, are we slowing more than that or not? And the headwinds that we're getting on the trade side of things, on export growth, the weak growth abroad, of course, feeds into our export numbers. I think that's a headwind that we have to take seriously and watch.
We take them one at a time. We're not on a preset course, but we will act as appropriate to sustain low unemployment rate and solid growth and stable inflation. We said that in June, July, and September, and I'm saying it to you tonight.
I still have an open mind. We still have more data between now and when the meeting actually occurs. I'm going to be quite attentive to what's happening with anything that indicates that the consumer is changing their view. So I think there's still a little bit more data before the meeting. I don't think I should prejudge it at this point. We've already had 2 easings. The easings don't have their impact immediately.
So, Sean, the problem is that there are a number of dissenters at the Fed, despite where market expectations lie. How do you convince people that there need to be more rate cuts when they didn't see the merits in a rate cut to begin with?
Well, and what are the merits in a rate cut? I mean, bonds have never been lower across the curve. Credit spreads are still reasonably compressed. They've widened out a little bit, but the absolute rates for lower rates of credit are still historically low. Credit is now actually look at the banking system. Over the last 6-8 months, there's been a big turnaround. It was quite slow at the last end of last year. There wasn't much new credit being created. Money aggregates were slowing down dramatically. they've picked up enormously in the past 6 months. They're now adding loans and M2 type liabilities at a rate we haven't seen since the first rounds of QE. Why do we need to be cutting? What is it going to help? Yes, the American economy is slowing. Yes, there are problems, but why is the interest rate? It's another hammer nail issue, isn't it?
That if we didn't have it, that arguably Wall Street might be more volatile, it might be lower than this, then you'd see some infection of that attitude on Main Street, which simply has not happened at this point.
With Wall Street being more volatile?
Well, where does it say
for Main Street there might be a problem.
Where does it say in the Fed mandate that we will keep inflation at around 2%, we will try to promote full employment, and we will stop Wall Street ever having a bad quarter? Does it actually say that in the documents? I don't think it does. I must have missed that.
But we know that confidence of the US consumer is king. We just had Steve Schwartzman here this morning saying that the economy is made up 70% of consumption. So effectively, if you have Main Street with all those pension portfolios that are being hit because they're seeing Wall Street tanking and they're not spending coming up to the holiday season, then we could have a double layer on top where it's not just manufacturing, it's also consumer taking a hit at this point.
Are you telling me that a small businessman out in Cincinnati or a housewife in Palo Alto is not going to go to the store because Apple stock is 10% lower? I don't think it works that way. This is a fiction. And again, the consumer is the end goal of the economy. 70% of the economy is hidden from GDP numbers by the way that we take out business-to-business spending, and production is all of the economy. If that's going well, the consumer will have money in the pocket, will have a job, will spend some of it in the proportion that he or she deems fit, and will put some of the rest of it away for their savings for later periods. This idea that if the stock market is, yes, we scream the headlines, but ultimately consumer confidence comes down to, does my job pay my bills now, and will that job be there in 6 months' time? And I'm not sure that's that directly linked to what goes on Wall Street.
Will that job will be there or not? Because borrowing costs, if they come down, it shores up business at a time when they're facing the pressure from a trade war, and that's small business as well as large business.
So did we not have any businesses when interest rates were 4%, 5%, 8%, 15%? All that happens as you put interest rates down is the company says, there's the interest rate cost, how much debt can I get to that interest rate cost? So you pile more and more debt on for the same outlay. And so, I
take your point, but the transition that we've seen across on Main Street has been fairly fierce, even more so in recent years than what it was back then. As we talk about a 4% interest rate, we didn't have this digital transformation taking place at this type of disruptive force. So you've got companies battling trade wins, economic wins, but also digital transformation at this point.
Well, but all the businesses that fail under digital transformation are the businesses who have weak balance sheets because they've borrowed too much. They've borrowed too much because they've been able to, because the Fed and Wall Street have enabled them to take that debt on. If they had solid balance sheets, Sears and all these other guys would have been able to ride out the storm, but they've already spent the seed corn.
That's it. We're done. Thank you very much indeed. Very happy Monday. I really enjoyed that. Nice and easy.
We had 20 seconds left. We couldn't keep on going.
No, absolutely. Sean, lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed for that. Sean Corrigan, Director of Cantillon Consulting as well. Well, from Karen and myself, that's it. That was Squawk Box. Up next, I can see Jumana Bassetti waiting in the wings. That will be Street Signs. Have a good Monday.
Trading is a lot like life. Trading has drama, energy.
I can find and fund my car. From a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
LinkedIn Learning offers more than 14,000 online courses to help you achieve your goals. Its short video tutorials cover business, technology, and creative skills employers look for at every level, all taught by real-world industry experts. And new courses are added every week. Plus, LinkedIn Learning is personalized, recommending courses based on your interests and skills. Start your free trial at linkedinlearning.com. Cancel within the first month to avoid any charges.
If you're collecting your prescription, don't assume you can claim it for free. Not all benefits entitle you to free prescriptions. And if you claim when you're not entitled, you could face a penalty charge of up to £100. Thankfully, there's a simple way to find out if you should be paying. Search Check Before You Tick online and use our eligibility checker to find out if your benefits mean you can claim for free, or you can ask your pharmacy team. So always remember to check before you tick. This was brought to you by the NHS.
I need to get to Birmingham in exactly 1 hour, 22 minutes. But how? A chair? But rocket-powered. Is that a thing? A chair on rockets. On rockets! A big fat rocket fest! Does sound a little dicey. Okay. How about a nice comfy chair on lovely sturdy wheels? Yeah. On super fast tracks. Double yeah. And, wait, is it a Virgin train now? I suppose it is. Well, good. I'll do that. Virgin Trains, London to Birmingham in 1 hour, 22 minutes.
You don't just live in one room, so why should you Wi-Fi? With Sky Broadband's Wi-Fi guarantee, you'll get Wi-Fi in every room or money back. Perfect for food shopping in the bedroom, gaming in your PJs in the lounge, or streaming sci-fi movies in the kitchen. Get Sky's super-fast broadband and Wi-Fi guarantee. £32 a month for 18 months with $19.95 setup. Click on the banner now.
Sky Fibre errors, Sky Kit required. Refund on boost component of subscription paid during current minimum term up to date of claim. Minimum 3 megabits per second or money back. Prices may change during minimum term. See sky.com/guarantee.
TuneIn puts you on the sideline for the 2019 college football season free all year long. With college football on TuneIn, hear the home and away call for more than 140 schools live. Regular season matchups and rivalry games. Conference championships and bowl games. The college football playoff.
Throw it. He's got it on a stiff arm. End zone. Touchdown.
You can listen to it all for free at home, on campus, or on the road. Hear the excitement and pageantry of college football all season long, free on TuneIn.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
Hi, this is Brian Weber, host of NFL First and Goal every Sunday, kicking off at 1 Eastern only on TuneIn Premium. Be sure to listen this Sunday for the ultimate football fan experience, featuring 7 hours of commercial-free coverage of every scoring play around the NFL.
Good morning and welcome to Street Signs. I'm Jemima Versace.
And I'm Bill Marks, and here are your headlines this Monday morning.
The calm before the storm. Investors turn their attention to U.S.-China trade talks after a report that Beijing wants to narrow the scope of any deal. Blackstone CEO Steve Schwarzman tells CNBC that reaching an agreement will be tricky.
There are many in China who say that's okay, but there are others who don't want to change. So we have three parties at the table. We have the U.S., and we have the Chinese reformers, and we have the Chinese hardliners.
HSBC is reportedly set to slash up to 10,000 jobs as the lender looks to cut costs under new interim CEO Noel Quinn.
Bayer shares tick higher after another trial over the Roundup weed killer is delayed, and a sign the German chemicals giant is inching closer to an out-of-court settlement.
And AMS fails in its €4.5 billion takeover bid of Osram, sending shares in the German lighting group lower. But Osram CFO tells us the company is open to collaboration with the Austrian chipmaker.
Well, good morning and welcome to Street Signs. It's the start of a new trading week, so let's get into some of the price action. Wall Street did see a higher close on Friday. We had what some people are calling a Goldilocks employment report. Even though the headline number came in slightly lower than expectations, still showed pretty firm employment backdrop with the unemployment rate at a 50-year low. So we saw much higher close across the three indices of Wall Street. That yielded into somewhat of a mixed session for Asia. Now the focus overnight has shifted to those upcoming trade talks taking place between Washington and Beijing this week on Thursday. So all eyes on that. It's going to be a critical week as far as those trade discussions are concerned. And you can see that in Europe, after attempting a more positive start to the trading session, we've actually got the Stocks Europe 600 also trading on the back foot now, down about 0.1 of a percentage point. And this after a very weak week last week. The Stock 600 was down about 3.6% for the week last week. So very heavy trading session for Europe. And a lot of that was on back of this trade war narrative and also growth concerns, something that, of course, is underpinning the narrative around Europe in the last couple of weeks or so. But let's talk about individual European markets, because it isn't just about the global macro, but also about individual stories. We've got the FTSE 100 trading on the back foot, down 0.2 of a percentage point. Again, politics squarely in focus, even though the GDP number that came out last week slightly better than expectations. The focus is still very much on what happens in the next couple of weeks and whether or not the UK will actually end up leaving the EU on October the 31st with a deal. We still don't know, and the clock is ticking. Sector DAX in Germany down 0.3 of a percentage point. More weak and disappointing data there. The German factory orders came in at minus 0.6% month on month versus expectations of minus 0.3%. So again, weak factory orders yet again hanging over the German economy. CAC 40 down about 0.5% as well. And one name in particular we're looking at there is the media company Publicis that got downgraded by Morgan Stanley right at the bottom of the CAC 40. And then you've also got the Italian index down about 0.2 of a percentage point. It's a bit of a gloomy mood after an attempt to start positively earlier on. Switching to sectors, and let's look at the breakdown here. Up at the top, we've got food and beverages, so still somewhat of a defensive bias to trading today. Healthcare up 0.5 percentage point. As we were just talking about, Bayer is one of the names that is outperforming, and this after one of their lawsuits against the weed killer got postponed. So on the back of that, we are seeing the German chemicals company, healthcare company, trade up about 2%. At the bottom, we've got autos down 1%. Again, I said trade is very much squarely in focus this week with the conversations taking place between China and the US and Washington. And then banks also down 0.7 of a percentage point. One in particular we're looking at there is HSBC, but more on that story in just a little bit.
And as Jumana alluded to there, a US court has indefinitely postponed a lawsuit brought against Bayer for its glyphosate-based weed killer Roundup. This was the latest trial involving the German chemicals giant to be delayed. A mediator has been trying to negotiate out-of-court settlements between Bayer and more than 18,000 American plaintiffs. Those complainants have demanded damages linked to claims about the herbicide's carcinogenic properties. And AMS has failed in its 4.5 billion euro takeover bid of Osram. The Austrian chipmaker secured only 51.6% of Osram shares. That was less than the 62.5% threshold required for an all-cash acquisition. But AMS says it is still aiming for a deal and will now explore other strategic options to acquire the German lighting group. And a big story in banking. The Financial Times reporting that HSBC plans to slash up to 10,000 jobs in a cost-cutting drive. The newspaper reports that interim CEO Noel Quinn has worked with CFO Ewan Stevenson to reduce costs in each of the bank's 4 major units. The job reductions will target highly paid positions, according to the FT, and of course will follow the roughly 4,000 redundancies the bank announced back in August. HSBC declined to comment about the report to CNBC.
And meanwhile, Societe Generale CEO Frédéric Oudéa has slammed the ECB's bond buying scheme. Oudéa told the Financial Times the central bank's policy will hinder consolidation and prop up, quote, average mediocre retail banks that should disappear in 2 years. Oudéa joins a chorus of other ECB critics. They include bosses from Allianz, Deutsche Bank, Commerzbank, and ING. Now, speaking to CNBC, Blackstone CEO Steve Schwarzman warned of the consequences of negative rates and urged for more fiscal stimulus.
This is, I think, a governmental issue. And monetary policy feels like it's sort of run its course. You're in negative territory for $13 trillion of bonds. And the way to get out of that trap isn't lowering rates further. It's really you need fiscal stimulus.
And the U.S. jobs report slightly dampened expectations of a rate cut from the Fed this month, but the market is still implying an 80% chance of a quarter-point move. Kansas City Fed President Esther George stuck to her hawkish stance this weekend. She said concerns about low inflation are unnecessary. And meanwhile, several of her colleagues on Friday seemed more open to the possibility of another cut.
The job growth is pretty consistent with trend job growth. I mean, still above trend job growth, but slowing from last year. And, coming into this year, we knew that things were going to be slowing down because we were above trend last year, pretty strong economy last year. Really now, it's really, are we slowing more than that or not? And the headwinds that we're getting on the trade side of things, on export growth, the weak growth abroad, of course, feeds into our export numbers. I think that's a headwind that we have to take seriously and watch.
We take them one at a time. We're not on a preset course, but we will act as appropriate to sustain low unemployment rate and solid growth and stable inflation. We said that in June, July, and September, and I'm saying it to you tonight.
I still have an open mind. We still have more data between now and when the meeting actually occurs. I'm going to be quite attentive to what's happening with anything that indicates that the consumer is changing their view. So I think there's still a little bit more data before the meeting. I don't think I should prejudge it at this point. We've already had 2 easings. The easings don't have their impact immediately.
So that was a sequence of various Fed speakers and some interesting mood music, I should say, in the background there. Richard Kelly, head of global strategy from TD Securities, joins us around said. Speaking of the Fed's mood music, we get the Fed minutes this Wednesday and are likely to show a somewhat split committee. I think people were surprised last time around that only 7 members of the committee, weren't convinced that the economy warranted an extra cut. What type of signal are you expecting for the market to receive from these minutes on Wednesday, if it does indeed show that amount of cacophony?
I think the message you're getting is the Fed really isn't thinking that far beyond meeting to meeting. And I mean, those 7 dots are the same we saw in June when they turned around and cut 6 weeks later. So I think this is a Fed that every time they're going in, think that they've done enough, but over the next 6 weeks, the data deteriorates, the trade war and the narrative gets a bit worse, and so they see themselves having to ease a bit further to try and sustain the recovery.
And indeed, we are seeing the data deteriorate. We got that ISM print last week, deep contractionary territory. Things on the ground continue to get worse. How much do you think that is factoring into their decisions real time now? I mean, in the sense that, these FOMC minutes are actually probably a little bit outdated at this point.
I mean, the minutes are always generally outdated by the time we get out because most of the members have been out and spoken to the public since those have come through, but it does give you a sense of what the discussion was, whether there's a bit more detail. But I think, we're definitely at a point here where this data, when you see those ISM collapse, it certainly gives them concern because while they're seeing labor market fragility, while they're seeing the service sector hold up, they don't want to see this filter in because then they know they waited too long.
Why do you think rates rallied so much last week? I was just taking a look. Sometimes it's good to take a look out and zoom out and look at, the price action. I mean, 10-year, 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, all of them rallied more than 20 basis points in last week's session. What was the catalyst behind that? And do you think there are some technical factors at play as well?
Well, I think you saw a lot of strong positioning in all of this. I mean, we saw an enormous rally over the course of the summer through August as sentiment got worse. Positioning was at extreme levels. Then you started to get mild positive news when it came to the trade war, and you started to get a few decent data prints here and there. And I think that gave the market a bit of relief. And this is now back to the normal trend. And I think this trend is going to be further rally. I think we're going to see 10-year treasuries approach 1% by the time we get to the end of the year.
You've got unemployment still there at that 50-year low. You've got inflation stubbornly refusing to budge. How does that factor in? You heard some of the comments there from various Fed presidents. How does that factor into their decision-making, do you think?
I mean, it gives them a sense that they're not that far behind the curve or that, that they don't need to do as much as, perhaps maybe is ultimately going to have to be needed. But the problem is both of those are lagging indicators. So if they're waiting for inflation to soften, if you're waiting for the unemployment rate to rise, you are already behind the curve. And so they're trying to be ahead of this. But the problem is this is a man-made slowdown. This is coming about because of structural changes being done in trade policy. And there's only so much the Fed can do to be in front of that.
We'll talk about that in a few moments' time, but let me just ask you, in terms of what they can do then, do you anticipate any significant change in their stance over the next few months?
So I think in October, I would expect another rate cut. I also think they're going to start buying treasuries again. That's going to be directed towards the problem we saw in repo. It's not QE, but it's going to look and smell and get the market talking about how the Fed is once again buying bonds.
So what size do you expect them to do there?
I think they're going to announce about $300 billion to come over the next year. The question is whether that's going to be done smoothly or whether they'll buy 50, 80 billion at a few meetings to build that stock up. So I think that gives you a bit of an extra kick, but I think there's still another 100 basis points of easing to come from the Fed because I think the economy is going to continue to slow.
Interesting. Okay, so you've got a very dovish tilt there. I just want to take it back to something that you mentioned now about the repo issues. The way they dealt with that has received a lot of criticism from the market, and that they allowed repo to come under a lot of pressure, for these overnight lending rates to spike up. Only then did they decide to act. What does that tell you about the Fed when it comes to the actual plumbing and the money market operations? Are they behind the curve?
Well, I guess it's not about the curve, and we haven't seen any lasting damage from what they did. I think it certainly took them by surprise that this came as early. They thought that this was going to be something maybe at year end, and they were getting their preparations in place. So they responded fast enough to ensure that tightening didn't last long enough to have consequences into the economy. But it shows we're in uncharted territory. They don't know any better than most people in the market how that plumbing is going and where the liquidity is needed, nor is there a good way to do that. And hence why they're going to use the blunt instrument of buying treasuries, I think, because it's very difficult to target those injections via the repo facility.
Just to pick up on that concept of buying treasuries, you've said a few $100 billion, and you're not sure right now whether that's going to be in one lump or split over time. What factors determine that, do you think?
I think it's a question of, I think ultimately, when you're sitting at 1.314 trillion, it's clear that we're probably a couple $100 billion short of the excess liquidity that needs to be in there. And so it's sort of a question of how quickly do they think they need to get that in. I don't think it would be one lump sum, but I think whether they would buy 50 billion a month for the first 3 to 4 months and then a small pacer go in really depends on how the market is handling, perhaps into, the end of October.
Do you think the spike in overnight rates is one of the reasons why the dollar has been so bid? And so actually maybe by bringing the plumbing, what I call the plumbing, back under control again, they'll be doing President Trump a favor because it will take some pressure off the dollar.
Well, I think the dollar bid just comes down to the slowing global growth. It comes down to the environment that there still aren't many, that Europe is doing worse than the U.S., so you don't have an alternative to go there. Emerging markets are still struggling because of this global growth environment. So the dollar is bid because it still is one of the few games in town for yield.
Less so because of the funding squeeze. All right, Richard, we'll pick up the conversation. Richard Kelly, Head of Global Strategy from TD Securities. Now, another company we're looking at today, Metro Bank shares are trading higher after the British newspaper, The Telegraph, reported that the company's founder, Vernon Hill, is on the hunt for financial backers to help him buy back the lender and to take it private. And the shares are actually now trading a little bit lower on the day, down 0.6%. On the year, though, on the last couple of years, down almost 100%. So big loss there. But we've discussed a lot of things on the show already. If you have any views on the U.S. economy, the non-farm payroll print, on any of the companies we spoke about, get involved. You can tweet us at Street Sign CNBC, or you can tweet us directly. I'm at CNBC Zhu. Willem is at Willem Marks.
And coming up on this show, demonstrations continue in Hong Kong after another weekend of violence draws a first warning from the Chinese military.
There's golf. And there's the golf lifestyle. Shop with Golf has...
At Harefield Hospital's private facilities, we provide short-notice heart and lung appointments whenever you need us, along with advanced diagnostics and pioneering treatments with our leading experts. Whether it's a heart or lung health screening, or to see one of our expert heart and lung consultants, we provide you with specialist private healthcare, quickly, expertly, and conveniently. Book a private appointment today at Harefield Hospital by visiting rbhh-specialistcare.co.uk.
Otto Sergey now checks for better energy deals so you don't have to. Meaning we can all sit back and relax. Can't we, Sergey? Sergey?
Hey? What?
Tell the people that we can sit back and relax.
Oh, we can sit back and relax.
Oh, don't waste energy worrying about energy. Automate it with Otto Sergey. Compare the market. Keep life simple.
Customer preferences determine alerts based on tariff type, payment type, supplier rating, and minimum annual saving of £50.
Hello, Vitality Health Insurance.
Oh, hi. Is it true if I join Vitality I get de facto 5-star rated cover, can speak to a GP 24/7, get rewarded for staying active with things like Starbucks coffee, get a little sausage dog to live with me, and you could beat my current premium by up to 10%?
Absolutely. Except one of those.
It's the dog, isn't it?
Yeah.
Time to review your health insurance. Just search Vitality Health. Vitality. Positively different. Minimum monthly premiums, terms and conditions apply.
NFL fans, football lives on TuneIn Premium.
Break the pro size, no, the ham size. He breaks 3 down to the 5. He's in. Touchdown!
Tonight, TuneIn has your Monday night NFL football with the Cleveland Browns at the San Francisco 49ers. Kickoff at 8:15 p.m. Eastern.
Touchdown. 20 to the 15 to the 10. 5. Mike Evans. Touchdown.
At home or on the go, hear the home and away call of every NFL game this season on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
Catch the latest news as it happens with MSNBC on TuneIn. From American politics to global events, when breaking news hits, you'll never miss a moment again. Search MSNBC on TuneIn to hear the latest.
You're listening to TuneIn, where you can hear all the audio you love in one place. Live NFL games, the hottest music, breaking news, and podcasts. Push play and go about your day, only on TuneIn.
Welcome back to the show. More than 100 people have died and at least 6,000 have been injured as protests in Iraq rage on after nearly a week of protests. Security forces have clashed with anti-government demonstrators in a number of cities. They are demanding an end to poor living standards, high unemployment, and alleged corruption. The government of Iraq has not faced unrest like this since the defeat of ISIS in 2017. Authorities have offered a package of reforms focused on housing and employment opportunities to try and calm the angry crowds. And meanwhile, Hong Kong protesters have defied new government measures to ban face masks. That has sparked a fresh round of violence directed at authorities. Chief Executive Carrie Lam reintroduced colonial-era legislation on Friday in an effort to undermine the efforts of activists. Our colleague Sherry Kang felt this report.
The first weekend of mask ban here in Hong Kong didn't really manage to quiet things down. If anything, it managed to anger some of the anti-government protesters even more. Some of the hardliners turned to violence and vandalism, and tens of thousands of anti-government protesters took to the streets, and all of them defying the mask ban this past weekend. That Friday, right after the mask ban was announced by the Hong Kong government, we saw an escalation in aggression. We saw Chinese banks and some pro-Beijing businesses and MTR stations, which is the main transportation system for a lot of Hong Kong people, being targeted. And even today, Hong Kong is still reeling from the aftermath. We see MTR stations as well as Airport Expressway being partially affected even today. There's a lot of nervousness out there here in Hong Kong, and we saw Hong Kong Monetary Authority, which is the de facto central bank of Hong Kong, having to defend the liquidity in Hong Kong's banking system as well. And tomorrow, most of Hong Kong goes back to work after the weekend and the public holiday today, and we'll see how much recovery will be done as the territory is trying to pick up the pieces. I'm Sherry Kang for CNBC, Hong Kong.
Well, Bloomberg has reported that China will seek to narrow trade talks with the US ahead of high-level negotiations in Washington this Thursday. The news agency reports that Chinese officials will take industrial policy reforms and government subsidies off the table. This would represent a setback for President Donald Trump, who's pushed for a broader trade deal to end the long-running dispute. Blackstone CEO Steve Schwarzman told CNBC earlier today that the US must negotiate with different and often competing factions during any back and forth with China.
The U.S. has sort of called it now and said we want change. And there are many in China who say that's okay. But there are others who don't want to change. So we have three parties at the table. We have the U.S., and we have the Chinese reformers, and we have the Chinese hardliners. So we're going to find out this week what the Chinese positions are, and then the U.S. will have a chance to take a look at it. We were very close to a deal in May, and then China pulled back and eliminated about a third of the agreement that was already had a handshake. There were still other issues that had to be resolved, but that led to the collapse of those talks. Now China is coming back to the table, and we'll see what they put on the table.
Well, we're still joined by Richard Kelly, Head of Global Strategy at TD Securities. I don't know whether you agree with Mr. Schwarzman there on that idea of competing factions on the Chinese side of the negotiating table. I don't know whether you think that they have indeed decided to take certain things back off the table that were once part of these negotiations. But if either that is the case, I mean, surely it's incredibly difficult to see any resolution to this in the near term.
Well, I mean, I don't think you're going to have a resolution into the U.S. election. So, I think that this is just part of the negotiation. I think the best you could hope for this week was not going to be any broad agreement because we're not there yet. It was going to be some sort of small, narrow agreement to continue to discuss further. And perhaps as a confidence-building measure, the Chinese would agree to buy some further farm goods in agreement for the U.S. to delay the current tariffs that are supposed to take place on the 15th. But we are nowhere close to a final deal here.
Forgive me if this sounds a bit like a parlor game, but how does that timetable of the 2020 presidential election, how does the emergence of this congressional impeachment inquiry factor into all this, do you think?
I mean, it's very difficult. You can make arguments on both sides that now the Trump administration has an incentive to move faster on the deal, so they have something to deflect. You can have an agreement. You can have an argument that it makes it harder because they're more distracted domestically. So I think you really have to kind of draw back. And at the end of the day, I don't think there's an incentive yet for the U.S. administration to reach a deal because they're still so far away from election that if you want the political chips from this, you probably want an agreement in March or April next year.
But wouldn't you say that time decay actually works in favor of a deal happening for this one? As in, the closer we get to 2020 election, the more likely it is that the U.S. will want to get to some form of a deal with China.
Well, I think there's two sides. So I think this is the peak period for agreement from the Chinese side because this is a time when Xi would have the most domestic political capital to walk away with some sort of deal. So I think in October, this was the side when you might see the Chinese willing to give a little bit if they could get a deal, but the U.S. isn't there yet. I think you go to March or April, there's probably more incentive from the U.S., but less from China.
So why do you say from China? Just because we're on the heel of the national holiday and he's reveling that, or what is the incentive from?
Yeah, I mean, since you have everyone meeting here, since you've had the anniversary, this is a time when domestically it would just sort of add to that impetus. Whereas as you move along, it doesn't necessarily look like the Chinese economy is going to be any worse. It's going to continue to be at this sort of low state where it's at, so you don't get further pressure there. They've already started to reform interest rate side of things, which is putting more stimulus in the pipeline in China to show that they are prepared for a long haul on this side of things. So I don't necessarily see any new impetus from here for the Chinese side to come and give any more than they have.
What about the currency? Any indications that becomes a factor in these discussions?
Well, I think that's the one interesting one. Outside of a quid pro quo of kind of some purchases or maybe some issues with dumping from the Chinese side, I think there is potential for them to discuss the currency in this. And while they tend to leave that outside, on that ilk, I think this is one where the Chinese might agree not to allow the currency to depreciate on a real or nominal basis if they can get a deal, only because the only reason the Chinese are letting the currency depreciate is because of the tariffs coming into effect. So I think it's still difficult to get there, but that's one where you could see an agreement on paper that looks like a big concession from the Chinese, but in fact is just saying if you stop putting tariffs, we will stop letting the currency
revert to where we were before.
Exactly.
Richard, looking at your core positions, you said that earlier in the show, you said you're long U.S. Treasuries. You see 10s going to 1%. You're also long gold and also long dollar renminbi as well. To me, it seems like you're putting all your eggs in the basket of risk off, and the possibility of not reaching a deal is much higher than the market seems to be factoring at this point. What if that doesn't pan out this week?
Well, I mean, you definitely start to move onto that side. So we're also kind of in 530s flatteners in the U.S. that sort of takes you in between there. But I do think, between long gold, long treasuries, long dollar CNH, it is a world where it seems like the trade war doesn't get resolved because of that's spilling into worse and worse data as we move along, and it reinforces those trades. The middle ground with that is equities that continue to rally on the back of this. The middle ground is potentially credit, where we know as things get worse, you have monetary stimulus step in, whether that's good or not. Whereas if things get better, it's because growth gets better and you can still have credit compress. So I think there are some middle grounds that may offer some sort of value, or something like EM, where we know that EM central banks are able to ease in this environment. That's making them a bit more resilient. So maybe there's some opportunities in the likes of South Africa or Russia, for example. Whereas if growth gets better, now you're buying EM on a fundamental basis.
Just to follow up on what Joanna said, if things do get slightly more resolved than perhaps your positions might anticipate, that's all good and well, but I'm going to whisper this. What about Europe? US-Europe trade?
Well, I think that is still, so one, the whole growth side of things is tied together. So Europe is struggling because of a US-China trade war that's hitting China and feeding through there and impacting on the auto side as well. So that is all, some of that does come off. But I think this is another reason why I'm okay with this sort of risk-off positioning. The US-China trade front is only one end. We know we have a very small side of the tariffs that will start between US and Europe. We know we have another deadline in the middle of November, and we know this is a US administration that is fine to push on that side of things. So I think if you resolve one, there's still a number of areas that we have to move down.
Another battleground.
Leave it there. Thanks so much, Richard. Really appreciate your time this morning. Richard Kelly, Head of Global Strategy at TD Securities.
And also coming up on the show, the race is on for Britain to seal a Brexit deal as France's Emmanuel Macron ratchets up the pressure on Prime Minister Boris Johnson. All the details coming up in just a few moments.
With SoFi, get your credit cards right by consolidating your credit card debt into one monthly payment.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like online skills tests, which let a candidate show that they are the right hire. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its cymbals when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are online skills tests.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring. Visit Indeed.com/try today to try skills tests for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. This means that travelling to the EU will change. You'll need to check online if your passport is valid for travel to Europe. If you're planning on driving, you'll need to check if you have the right documents to drive. And make sure your travel insurance covers all your healthcare needs. To keep your trip on track, check what you need to do at gov.uk/Brexit. Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October.
Make sure to follow TuneIn today, so you're always in the know. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Just search @TuneIn. Want to know what's happening in right now? The latest headlines are just a tap away with Fox News Talk on TuneIn. When news breaks, get up-to-the-minute coverage on developing stories from around the world. Plus, hear all the Fox shows you watch on your TV. Listen to Fox News Talk around the clock on TuneIn.
NFL fans, football lives on TuneIn Premium.
Wait, the pro size, no, the ham size. He breaks 3 down to the 5. He's in. Touchdown!
Tonight, TuneIn has your Monday night NFL football with the Cleveland Browns at the San Francisco 49ers. Kickoff at 8:15 p.m. Eastern.
Touchdown. 20 to the 15 to the 10. 5. Mike Evans. Touchdown.
At home or on the go, hear the home and away call of every NFL game this season on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
Did you know TuneIn doesn't just live here on your smart speaker? From the audio that moves you to the audio that gets you moving. Soundtrack your every movement with the free TuneIn app. Available on your phone or tablet. Download TuneIn on the App Store today.
Deep left center field. A grand slam!
October baseball is here, and TuneIn Premium is your ticket to the 2019 MLB postseason. Featuring the home and away feeds for every game, TuneIn Premium delivers every call of the ALCS, NLCS, and the 2019 World Series through the voices of the local radio broadcast teams.
In the air, left field and deep. He's at the wall.
Now until a new champion is crowned, hear every play of the 2019 MLB postseason live on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
Welcome back to Street Signs. I'm Willem Marks.
And I'm Jemana Versace, and these are your Monday morning headlines.
While the calm before the storm, investors turn their attention to US-China trade talks after a report that Beijing wants to narrow the scope of any deal. Blackstone CEO Steve Schwarzman tells CNBC that reaching an agreement will be tricky.
There are many in China who say that's okay, but there are others who don't want to change. So we have 3 parties at the table. We have the U.S., and we have the Chinese reformers, and we have the Chinese hardliners.
HSBC is reportedly set to slash up to 10,000 jobs as the lender looks to cut costs under new interim CEO Noel Quinn.
And buyer shares tick higher after another trial over the Roundup weed killer is delayed in a sign the German chemicals giant is inching closer to an out-of-court settlement.
And AMS fails in its €4.5 billion takeover bid of Osram, sending shares in the German lighting group lower. But Osram CFO tells us the company is open to collaboration with the Austrian chipmaker.
Well, some fresh numbers for you. Daimler says sales of its Mercedes-Benz cars rose by more than 10% in September. That was a record number for the month. Mercedes-Benz also posted its best ever third quarter, boosted by a strong performance in China. Daimler says it expects full-year sales to increase despite, quote, challenging times. Meanwhile, the automaker may have to recall thousands of its Sprinter vans. They're under the Mercedes-Benz brand due to concerns over potentially illegal engine software.
All right, Willem, let's take a look at how European markets are shaping up on this first day of the trading week. And this after a very heavy trading week last week. Stock 600 ended last week down north of 3%. So actually the mood is not that pretty as well this Monday morning, despite a positive end to Wall Street on Friday and a mixed session for Asia overnight. You can see all of the four majors are in the red already. FTSE 100 down about 0.1 of a percentage point. Still the relative outperformer. Again, politics squarely back in focus again. The DAX, the German index, is down about 0.2 of a percentage point. Again, driven by weak factory orders coming out there, is giving you yet another picture of a weak manufacturing industry in Germany this morning as well. CAC 40 also down 0.2 of a percentage point, and the Italian index down a similar amount. Let's switch and talk about foreign exchange though, because on Friday after the payroll numbers came out, we saw the dollar dip a little bit, and actually on the week, the dollar as a whole was about 0.3 of a percentage point weaker. But what we are seeing today is strength against most counterparts. So euro is trading on the back foot, still below that 110 mark though. 109.60 is where we're at, about 0.1 of a percentage point weaker. Again, the risk-off environment is really playing into the hands of euro here. Dollar yen, we're seeing a bit of bid for yen overnight, but cable also, the sterling pound, trading around 123, but still on the back foot yet again, about 0.25 of a percentage point in the red today as well. So as I mentioned, it will be a crucial couple of weeks when it comes to the political negotiations there. Let's take a quick look at U.S. futures as well. As I mentioned, Wall Street did close in the green on Friday, even though for the week the S&P and Dow were negative. Today it looks as though the three are taking their cue from European markets. S&P, Dow, NASDAQ all seen opening up in the red, Dow a little over 130 points to the downside. And again, this week you want to watch out for the Fed minutes on Wednesday, but then also all eyes on those upcoming trade negotiations between Washington and Beijing, set to take place in Washington from Thursday. So that will be a big data point for the market to watch out as we head to the end of the week.
Well, here we are, 9:35. Got to talk about something that we all love so much, Brexit. French President Emmanuel Macron has given the UK until the end of the week to negotiate a new Brexit deal. An official at the presidential Elysee Palace says Macron told British Prime Minister Boris Johnson over the phone that talks should continue and do so, quote, swiftly, to, quote, evaluate at the end of the week whether a deal is possible that respects European Union principles. Legislation passed last month in Westminster will require Johnson to ask for a Brexit delay if no deal is agreed by the 19th of October, but it remains unclear whether the Prime Minister will actually respect that requirement. Meanwhile, S&P Global says the risk of a no-deal Brexit remains high. In its latest report, the ratings agency predicts UK GDP will contract by 2.8% in 2020 if such a scenario goes ahead. Despite that risk, S&P's base case is that Britain will secure an agreement with the European Union. We're joined now by Paul Waters, Senior Director and Head of Corporate Research at S&P Global Ratings. Thanks so much for being with us. A lot of people throw around percentages at this stage, and those percentages change. Since last week, when the UK presented its latest proposal to the European Commission, has the risk of a no deal gone up or down in your view?
Well, I mean, we're not sort of commenting on percentage changes every day of the week, sure. But actually our considered view is at this stage, and it's actually remained at this point for a while, that the risk of a no deal remains meaningful, should not be ignored. But at the same time, recognizing what's going on, and given the Ben Act takes effect, at the end of the month, we think that a no deal at the end of the month is actually quite unlikely. A no deal, the landing zone to a no deal really sort of follows potentially a general election, depending on what the outcome of that would be.
We mentioned some of the projections you guys have come out with recently. Can you just walk us through how you crunch the data and how you come up with those kind of hard numbers for GDP and output?
Yeah, well, I mean, our economic team, I mean, they run a model, so we look at certain assumptions have sort of entered into that model, thinking about what the trade effect would be, thinking through what the effect on investment, which has already been under pressure over the last couple of years. We're obviously looking at the impact on sterling, which is obviously a key driver feeds through to inflation and consumer confidence. So basically, we're coming up with a scenario which actually, which we think looks reasonably realistic in a no-deal type scenario. Obviously, you have to benchmark that against what happened in the financial crisis as well to try and make sure that we're sort of in the right ballpark.
In terms of rating ramifications on a no-deal Brexit, is it fair for investors to expect a one-off move out of rating agencies like yourself, or could there potentially be longer-term ramifications? Would you continue to monitor the situation, especially if it leads to secondary effects like, say, a Scottish referendum?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the whole point about this report, to highlight that we're really trying to manage the risk as it transitions from, as it sort of becomes potentially reality. So we're trying to, what we've done so far with our risk assessment here is we've been doing stress tests to understand what the sensitivity is of entities that we rate in the event of a no deal. And if there's a very material effect, then obviously that warrants potentially an outlook change now, and in a few cases a rating change. But to your question, ultimately, the big effect here, we think, will play through from the macro downside scenario and how that plays into the economy over time. So we wouldn't expect a major change in ratings on day one in the event of a no deal.
For investors listening to someone like yourself, what should they be looking out for in terms of nations, sectors, even individual companies that could see the worst downside from a no-deal Brexit?
Yes. Well, I mean, we've gone through the different sectors, as you can see in this report. And actually, when you look at where the greatest rating sensitivity lies, I mean, we think that lies in pretty much the public sector. So we see some vulnerability in housing associations and potentially universities as well. In the corporate space, I think the main vulnerabilities still lie in sectors like you've talked about, automobiles and aerospace, where you've got complex cross-border supply chains. Consumer-facing sectors also would be potentially exposed, so leisure, retail, as well as transport infrastructure. And then there's real estate, of course, that has its own dynamics.
Well, can I just ask you about financial institutions? Because back in July, the Bank of England's FPC committee, so Financial Policy Committee, published a report saying the biggest risks of disruption in a worst-case disorderly Brexit, so a no-deal Brexit to financial services, have been addressed. So in their eyes, they actually think that the financial industry is somewhat cushioned or have built up a sufficient buffer to be able to deal with the ramifications of a no-deal Brexit. Do you share that view as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, the Bank of England stress test was a very severe worst-case tail risk type of stress test, which speaks to a global recession as well as a sort of no-deal type Brexit scenario. And as you say, the banks came out of that pretty resilient in terms of capital and the like. But over time, you would expect to see, obviously, the impact on asset quality and the consumer sector weakening, and that would play into some sort of headwinds coming in. But in terms of rating impact, we would think that it would be reflect more in outlook changes than actually over time, rather than any actual rating change itself.
We're 24 days from this current deadline, October the 7th. How different is this compared to 24 days before the last deadline, March the 7th?
Good question. That's an interesting question. I think, well, in terms of substance, in terms of the economic implications, I mean, this is probably not quite as severe, but I mean, in material terms, probably not that different. I think the reality, though, is that obviously the legal position is quite different in the sense that we have this extension bill. The Prime Minister obviously will respect the law, has to respect the law, and so we do expect an extension to happen at the end of the month, most likely.
One final question, actually, just to take it back to your initial point. You said a no-deal Brexit would likely be followed up by a general election. How would S&P view another general election, and also the possibility of it bringing in a change of government, perhaps with a more a pro-EU or an intention to have a closer relationship with the EU post-Brexit?
Well, I mean, we would respond as and when we saw the results of the election. But clearly, I mean, there's many different outcomes could fall out of an election. Obviously, a soft Brexit, a softer type Brexit would be seen, I think, as a positive from the financial market perspective, and obviously probably from a rating agency perspective as well, initially. Yeah.
All right, we'll leave it there. Paul, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. Paul Waters, a Senior Director and Head of Corporate Research from S&P Global Ratings. Now, our colleague Juliana Teitelbaum spoke with Unilever CEO Alan Jope and asked him how Brexit could affect the consumer goods giant.
Brexit for us comes down to one issue, which is friction. We don't want friction at the border. We really appreciate the free flow of goods, the free flow of people, the free flow of capital. And we're taking a bunch of steps to make sure that we can service our British business out of Britain and our continental European business out of continental Europe. We do stockpile a little bit. It just so happens that a lot of the products that we stockpiled in March were quite summer seasonal businesses. And so, if anything, an October date is easier for us to deal with. But it is by far not the biggest issue that we deal with. We're used to geopolitical instability of a different order of magnitude in places outside of Europe.
Have your Brexit plans changed at all on the back of, bearing in mind, of course, it's very recent, but Boris Johnson's revised proposal that he's submitted to the EU?
Not at all. We're planning for the worst case scenario, which is an exit with no deal, and hoping for some kind of deal that reduces friction. And so by planning for the worst, anything better than that is good news for us.
A second whistleblower has come forward with direct knowledge of President Donald Trump's dealings with Ukraine, according to an attorney in Washington. The person is already apparently working with intelligence officials. NBC News' Kelly O'Donnell has this report.
Tonight, a second witness is challenging President Trump's Ukraine call and the foreign help he sought to investigate the Bidens. The new whistleblower is cooperating with the intelligence community Inspector General Michael Atkinson, but is not expected to file a separate complaint. According to legal sources, this government official has first-hand knowledge that supported the first whistleblower, who submitted this 9-page document August 12th. First-hand knowledge is critical because whistleblower 1 was not a direct witness, but claimed to be informed by more than half a dozen U.S. officials. For Democrats, this new whistleblower could aid their impeachment inquiry.
We will want to hear from that person.
People who are in the very core of all of these events are saying this can't happen.
President Trump taunted on Twitter. They are going to the bench, and another whistleblower is coming in from the deep state. Keep them coming. But party unity has a few splinters. 3 GOP senators, Mitt Romney, Ben Sasse, and now Susan Collins, criticized President Trump for urging China to investigate Joe Biden and son Hunter's business there. The Bidens deny any wrongdoing. Collins is considered vulnerable for re-election in Maine.
I thought the president made a big mistake by asking China to get involved in investigating a political opponent. That's completely inappropriate.
That was Kelly O'Donnell from NBC reporting there. Now, North Korea has called off talks with the U.S. over its nuclear program, accusing Washington of inflexibility. The State Department rejected the accusations, saying it brought, quote, creative ideas to the table. Sweden, which hosted the talks, has extended an invitation to both countries for further discussions in 2 weeks. The U.S. has welcomed the invitation, but Pyongyang said Washington wouldn't be able to present alternative plans within the fortnight. So something else that we need to be keeping an eye on as well, then, in addition to all of the other geopolitical risks out there. Willem, if you have any views on anything we've discussed, UK Brexit, the S&P report, or indeed geopolitical risk, get involved. You can tweet us at StreetSignsCNBC or tweet us directly. I am at CNBC Zhu, and Willem is at Willem Marks. And also coming up on Street Signs, put up or shut up. Hong Kong exchanges and clearing faces a looming deadline to make a formal offer for the LSE. We'll be live from outside the London Exchange with more in just a few moments.
Thanks for coming in.
No problem.
Since one of our laptops got hacked on a business trip, everyone's been a little paranoid.
You're 169 in the queue.
I proposed on the 169. She got for the next stop.
You're my 169th greatest lover.
The number 169 never screamed going places until now. Get the Toyota Aygo X-Play for only £169 deposit, then £169 a month with 0% APR representative. Just go. Aygo.
0% APR representative on new sales of Aygo X-Play over 48 months. £169 per month. Customer deposit of £169 when proposed and approved via Access Toyota by 31st of October 2019. £3,487 and 50p optional final payment. Subject to status to over 18s. Indemnities may be required. Conditions apply. Toyota Financial Services.
The relaxing sound of fresh, cold running water. and you can have it in your kitchen. With amazing savings on Samsung fridge freezers at Currys PC World, like the RB31 with its chilled water dispenser for only $399. Or upgrade to the Samsung RS8000 American-style fridge freezer with water and ice dispenser. A huge 609 litres of storage space at just $1,049. How relaxing. At Currys PC World. Energy rating A+. T's and C's apply.
You don't just live in one room, so why should your Wi-Fi? With Sky Broadband's Wi-Fi guarantee, you'll get Wi-Fi in every room or money back. Perfect for food shopping in the bedroom, gaming in your PJs in the lounge, or streaming sci-fi movies in the kitchen. Get Sky's super-fast broadband and Wi-Fi guarantee. £32 a month for 18 months with $19.95 setup. Click on the banner now.
Sky Fibre areas, Sky Kit required. Refund on boost component of subscription paid during current minimum term up to date of claim. Minimum 3 megabits per second or money back. Prices may change during minimum term. See sky.com/guarantee.
Deep left center field. A grand slam!
October baseball is here, and TuneIn Premium is your ticket to the 2019 MLB postseason. Featuring the home and away feeds for every game, TuneIn Premium delivers every call of the ALCS, NLCS, and the 2019 World Series through the voices of the local radio broadcast teams.
Air, left field and deep. He's at the wall.
Now until a new champion is crowned, hear every play of the 2019 MLB postseason live on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
MSNBC is on TuneIn. Get up-to-the-minute coverage on news and events from around the world with MSNBC's live 24/7 station on TuneIn. At home or on the go, stay up to date on the latest news and political trends with MSNBC's full lineup of shows, including Hardball with Chris Matthews.
Hi, I'm Chris Matthews. Thanks for listening to MSNBC on TuneIn.
And The Rachel Maddow Show. Plus, when news breaks, MSNBC has you covered with live updates, expert analysis, and more. Search MSNBC on TuneIn today.
Welcome back to Street Signs. Vodafone is testing open access radio technology here in the UK that could reduce the cost of phone calls and access to mobile data. The rollout of the new technology would allow Vodafone to challenge the three largest network equipment suppliers, Huawei, Ericsson, and Nokia.
Meanwhile, Dialog has acquired Creative Chips in a bid to expand its portfolio of Internet of Things products. The UK chipmaker says it will fund the deal with a cash payment of around $80 million. And Creative Chips also stands to receive an additional $23 million in the deal if it meets its revenue targets.
And shares in Publicis are trading near the bottom of the CAC 40 in Paris after Morgan Stanley cut the stock to underweight and lowered the price target to €38, down from €54.
And it's crunch time for the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. The group has until Wednesday to make a formal bid for the London Stock Exchange or walk away from the deal. Now, according to the Times newspaper, Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing will raise its £29.6 billion offer. The LSE has already rejected the most recent bid and said it prefers to stick to its plan to buy Refinitiv. Our colleague Juliana joins us live from the LSE, and you've been monitoring the developments of this story over the last couple of weeks. Juliana, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange has been on a charm offensive trying to sway LSE shareholders. What is the likelihood that they actually succeed in the coming days?
Well, Jemana, it's a great question, and it doesn't necessarily just come down to price, but also around assurances that Hong Kong Exchange could give on the governance front. And of course, this deal remains really weighed down by political and regulatory uncertainty. Now, to help us understand what we could expect from Hong Kong and around the overall feasibility of this deal, I'm now joined by Stephen Grubb from Vision 57. Thank you very much for joining me out here today. So, even if we see Hong Kong Exchange come back this week with a sweetened offer, a higher price, higher cash component, some governance reassurances, can they do anything to alleviate the political and regulatory uncertainty surrounding this deal?
I think it still looks like it's going to be a little bit of a challenge, because as well as the view from London, you've also got the issue that China holds over $1 trillion worth of US government debt, and LCH, which is owned by LSE, clears most of the US Treasury swap transactions. So you're going to get an American view weighing in here too, even if the view from London gets better.
Even if the view from London, even if the view from China gets better. So a huge amount of political challenge surrounding this deal. Now, just honing in on the timing from Hong Kong's perspective, it's hardly the best backdrop given the escalation in tensions on the ground in Hong Kong. Why do you think they've stepped forward to launch this offer now?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because I think that the idea first came about over a year ago. But clearly they've decided that with the LSE Refinitiv deal that their hand was forced somewhat, and they had no choice but to push ahead, because no one would probably have thought it was a good idea otherwise.
Now, do you think that Hong Kong Exchange has a backup plan? If LSE doesn't work out, what is the opportunity for them at that point?
Well, certainly, the intellectual positioning in terms of connecting East v West, makes a lot of sense at a intellectual level. The problem's going to be who's going to be another potential suitor. I mean, you might think of Deutsche Börse, but of course, with Deutsche Börse has failed to do deals itself with the LSE a couple of times. So it looks like it's hard for them to find another natural partner in this, really.
Now, let's come on to LCH, which you just mentioned there. And this is really central to Hong Kong Exchange's vision for LSE. This is their clearinghouse, which is the world's largest processor of U.S. dollar-denominated swaps. Would this business be attractive to a U.S. exchange?
Well, potentially, yes, of course it would. But again, we've seen deals between LSE and U.S. exchanges fall apart before. And again, I think you still stoke up the same kind of primordial nationalistic tensions between the US acquiring a bit of UK vital infrastructure.
So at this point, would you say it's unlikely that we see a US counterbid for the LSE?
I think that's unlikely at the minute, yes.
And now,
because for no other reason than with all the Brexit uncertainty too, I think people want to wait and see what's happening on that front as well.
And to that point, we obviously heard from the Hong Kong Exchange chairman really playing up the opportunity and the vote of confidence that this suggests in the UK market from the Hong Kong side. Now, the Refinitiv deal, this is one of the key conditions from the Hong Kong side that LSE has to ditch this deal in order to proceed with theirs. I mean, from an LSE shareholder point of view, is there really much merit in dropping this deal?
Well, not from a shareholder point of view, because exchanges the world over have worked out that it's all about the data. And so the idea of LSE with Refinitiv was a very nice play there, enabling them to look at monetizing all sorts of different types of data in new ways, AI, machine learning, and so on. So I think again, it looks hard from an investor point of view to not want to do that deal.
Now, if I look more broadly at the sector, we spoke to the former LSE CEO, Xavier Rollet, and his view back in September when this deal broke was that globally we're going to see this sector consolidate, and we will see very few players actually emerge. We're going to see a lot of deals come together, and there's not going to be a lot of room for local and regional players. As an industry expert, what do you think of this view?
I think there's always going to be room for smaller bourses that can focus in on a particular sector or of the marketplace or a particular asset class. And of course, the governments of those countries are keen that they don't see the trading in their key names go to foreign venues. So I agree with Roland in terms of the long-term vision, but I don't think it'll happen as quickly as maybe he thinks.
All right, thank you very much. Well, that was Stephen Grob from Vision 57. The date to watch this week, October 9th. That is the deadline by which Hong Kong Exchange must submit a formal offer for LSE or walk away. Guys?
And hopefully we'll finally get some clarity on that date, Wednesday. That is, Juliana, thank you for covering the story, and as she has been the last couple of weeks. A quick look at how European markets are faring on this first day of the trading week. Not a pretty picture. We've got the four indices trading in negative territory, slightly so below the flat line. CAC 40 down about 0.2 percentage point. The Italian index is the underperformer today, down 0.3. But let's talk about the U.S. though. We did have a positive close to Wall Street on Friday after the payroll number came out. A little bit disappointing relative to expectations, but still firm when it comes to the overall unemployment rate. But now the mood has shifted downwards, and you can see that S&P, Dow, NASDAQ are all pointed to open up in the red when they do open up in a couple of hours. All eyes on those trade discussions, though, this week, later this week. But that is it for our show today. I'm Giovanna Versace.
And I'm Willem Marks. Thanks for watching. Worldwide Exchange coming up right now.
hard 20 after a hard day.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like online skills tests, which let a candidate show that they are the right hire. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its symbols when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are online skills tests.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring. Visit Indeed.com/try today to try skills tests for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
Fly from London Heathrow to Shannon from $55.99 each way as part of a return trip with Aer Lingus and experience something new on your next trip to Ireland. Discover the soaring cliffs and stunning scenery of the wild Atlantic Way. Explore the charming local towns and relax by the fireside with some traditional music and fresh seafood. Smart enjoys a short break in Ireland. Smart flies, Aer Lingus. Book now at airlingus.com. Offer subject to conditions and availability.
You're 169 in the queue.
I proposed on the 169. She got off at the next stop.
Oh, you're my 169th greatest lover.
The number 169 never screamed going places until now. Get the Toyota Aygo X-Play for only £169 deposit, then £169 a month with 0% APR representative. Just go. Aygo.
0% APR representative on new sales of Aygo X-Play over 48 months. £169 per month. Customer deposit of £169 when proposed and approved via Access Toyota by 31st of October 2019. £3,487.50p optional final payment. Subject to status to over 18s. Indemnities may be required. Conditions apply. Toyota Financial Services.
The chance of being hurt while using a leaf blower is about 3,000 to 1. Oh, unlucky. Never mind, at Curry's PC World, there's a 1 in 10 chance to get half your money back on all 2019 LG OLED TVs. Like the LG C9, described by Which as simply the best. Get blown away with Apple AirPlay, Google Assistant and Amazon Alexa built in. And there's up to £500 off. So the question is, are you feeling lucky? At Curry's PC World. T's and C's apply. GB16 plus. See currys.co.uk.
Whether mending fences in the Highlands or on a building site in Cornwall, there are thousands of hard-working Ford commercial vehicles in the UK. It's why we're truly the backbone of business. And now we'll give you £1,000 off the recommended retail price if you test drive and purchase a vehicle during our Backbone of Business dealer event from the 11th to the 21st of October. That'll really get your business moving. Ford Commercial Vehicles. The backbone of business. Search Backbone of Business to learn more.
At participating dealers, exclusions apply.
Make sure to follow TuneIn today so you're always in the know. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Just search @TuneIn. You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Futures pointing to a lower open after a wild ride for stocks to kick off the fourth quarter. No deal ahead? Maybe not. Why Robert Lighthizer and Peter Navarro may be preparing for the worst as U.S.-China trade talks resume in D.C. this week. Speaking of no progress, trouble in Detroit. The GM worker strike now entering its fourth week, and there is no end in sight. Tension also rising in D.C. as yet another whistleblower stepping forward with new information over that now infamous Ukraine phone call. And continued crisis in Hong Kong. The city police once again descending on protesters as they push back against the newly imposed mask ban. It is Monday, October 7th, and Worldwide Exchange begins right now. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome from wherever in the world that you may be watching. I am Brian Sullivan. Happy Monday. Thanks for joining us. Well, here's how your money, the markets, and the global economies are setting up their week. Stock futures looking like some of the weakness that we saw to begin last week will continue this week as well. Dow futures, they are indicating that the markets will drop 136 points right now at the open. And remember, what we have seen a lot of on this program right at 5 a.m. is that this trend tends to get magnified unless we see some big data points that change it around. Not saying things will get worse, but we've certainly seen this tend to accelerate as the traders come into their desks in New York, down 141 points right now. Now in bonds, no big economic data out today, later on this week, yes, and no earnings out today. But of course, the big earnings season, hard to believe, already kicks off next week. All right, around the world, you had China and Hong Kong closed for a national holiday. The Japanese market down fractionally 0.16%. Australia rose, and the South Korean economy rose as well. In Europe, a lower trade to start their week as well. Not a major trend that we are seeing anywhere overseas. Yeah, there's a lot of red, but you can see the numbers there are quite small. All right, so there's your setup. Let's get now to the news and to begin, where else? With trade and the likely reason why futures are pointing to a lower open. Chinese officials are reportedly growing hesitant to pursue a broad trade deal with the United States as talks are set to resume this week. The Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, who will lead negotiations for his country, is telling dignitaries that his offer to the United States will apparently not include commitments on reforming China's industrial policy or government subsidies. Remember, these are among the Trump administration's main demands in the trade talks. Now, if that report is accurate, this is viewed as a big setback, and the markets, as you noticed, are reflecting it. Well, trade talks are not the only thing on the calendar this week. We can also expect new comments from Fed Chairman Jay Powell, minutes from the Fed's latest meeting, and some new inflation data toward the back half. Joining us now to talk about that and your setup this week, this month, and for the rest of the year, Direction Managing Director Dave Mazza. Dave, I'll join you on set in just 1 minute. Overall, what kinds of moves are you seeing your clients there at Direction make right now?
It's really interesting. So obviously we know the headlines that you just went through, trade talks, what's going to happen with the Fed, but we're actually beginning to see a lot of interesting moves setting up for the 2020 election. So in particular, an area like healthcare and biotech, as we know, is getting a lot of attention, especially as Elizabeth Warren has gained in the polls. But we're actually seeing traders engage on both sides. So both our leveraged bull ETF and our leveraged bear ETF, where people are sort of fighting it out to say where might we be from that perspective.
Okay, so what are they doing in particular? They're buying biotech?
Yeah, exactly. So what we're seeing is actually they're moving away from broad-based healthcare, which a lot of the bigger names like J&J have been in the news from both an opioid perspective, and of course that is really in the managed care space where a lot of the potential impact of Medicare for all will be.
They're getting out of sort of big pharma, big healthcare.
Correct, but they're moving into biotech, and it might be a bit counterintuitive because biotech is a riskier area in the healthcare space. But it's interesting; it's a bit insulated from some of the areas like you see with big pharma. So we're actually seeing some activity there, moving away from the bigger space and moving into some of these smaller biotech names.
So they're placing bets that biotech, at least in the near term, is going to go up.
Yeah, exactly. But what's interesting here is we know the 2020 election is some time away. There's still a lot of room to run in regards to who actually the candidate's going to be. But what it is telling me is that even with all the headlines that we see, some of the negative economic data last week, the concerns of recession, people are actually maybe starting to see through that and saying, especially if they're in the trading community, beginning to start placing some bets, placing some areas that might actually do well, regardless of the outcome of what trade talks might be.
When you look at the macro picture, just sort of the bigger ETFs, the more broad market ETFs, are people becoming more negative on the overall market, or are they staying long and strong?
Well, the marketplace feels long and strong, but it's more been climbing a wall worry. We've been in this fat trading range from August. We expect that to continue to be the case. So we've actually seen investors be more defensive, at least in the broad-based positioning, and begin to pick their spots, whether that's an industry like biotech or in other cases like more quality, more defensive type companies.
Well, we've been really in a trading range for about the last 18 months. I mean, obviously, December skewed everything, right? Yes. I mean, if December didn't exist, wouldn't that be nice? If December didn't exist, the markets would be solidly higher. We're actually basically, with the S&P and the NASDAQ, effectively where we were a year and a half ago.
No, that's exactly right. So the trend that we've been in, again, if you exclude the kind of drawdown that we saw in Q4, has been almost flat to slightly positive. And there's been big divergences of areas that have done well. Look at the year-over-year performance. Utilities is actually the best performing sector.
Right? Basically a bond proxy.
Exactly, and you never think that, right? You continue to think it's tech, continue to think of the areas that get a lot of attention, but that tells you something. Even though markets have been going up and going up pretty well, it's been led by the bond proxies, right? The most defensive areas. So investors can still have opportunities to actually make money in today's market, but it might be through areas.
If somebody would have said, "Hey, Dave, I think a year ago utilities are going to outperform Netflix, you'd have been like, man, you got to lay off the hooch.
Yeah,
right? Because you've been drinking. But guess what? That person was right.
Exactly right.
Dave Maza of Direction, thank you very much. Have a great week. We'll see you soon. Thank you. Well, your other big story on this Monday, a deterioration in the contract talks in Detroit. The UAW strike at General Motors now entering its fourth week, and it does not appear there will be a quick settlement anytime soon. In fact, the two sides appear to be farther apart than ever before. Contessa Brewer joining us now with more on this story. Contessa.
Hi there, Brian. Yeah, day 22 here of the strike, and the negotiations have taken a turn for the worse. UAW Vice President Terry Dittus sent a letter to members yesterday informing them the union presented a proposal to GM this weekend. GM responded by reverting back to an offer that had already been rejected. Dittus says the offer did not address a host of items such as product commitments for U.S. factories and job security. He says the UAW could not be more disappointed with GM, and after making some progress on important issues, the company has shown an unwillingness to pay its union workers fairly. In a statement, GM says it continues to negotiate in good faith with the UAW, and it's committed to talking around the clock to resolve the contract dispute. The Associated Press reports the UAW has voiced concerns about GM increasing production in Mexico, where it builds pickup trucks and 2 SUVs and small cars. In fact, more than 20% of GM vehicles sold in the U.S. are made in Mexico. GM's U.S. factories have been shut down since the union walked out, and analysts say the company is losing more than $80 million a day. Workers are getting just $250 a week in strike pay. That's about a fifth of what they normally earn. You know, it really boils down to this long-term job security about where jobs are, Brian. The company says it would invest $7 billion in plants in the United States, but it still wants flexibility to move plants around where they see fit.
Yeah, and a lot of those plants happen to be in the American South, where the workers either may not be unionized or at least may not feel the protections that they once had, certainly in Michigan and Ohio and those places.
Yeah, you're right, Brian.
All right, Contessa, we're going to see you back on set here soon. Thank you very much. All right, when we come back on this Monday morning, tensions rising again over the weekend in Hong Kong. Protesters pushing back against emergency measures against wearing masks. And later, a lesson in leadership. How Tim Cook is saving Apple from the trade war and using his personal ties to the White House to do it. But first, that trade war hitting America's heartland right where it hurts. And the heartland is where we find our Frank Holland early this Monday morning. Frank.
Hey, good morning, Brian. We're here in the Quad Cities area where normally farmers would have spent the last few weeks working their fields and probably buying some new equipment. Instead, they're talking about weather and the ongoing trade war. We're going to explain how that's impacting John Deere and other makers of farm machinery. That's coming up on Worldwide Exchange.
Imagine
you're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like online skills tests, which let a candidate show that they are the right hire. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its symbols when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are online skills tests.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring. Visit Indeed.com/try today to try skills tests for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. This means that travelling to the EU will change. You'll need to check online if your passport is valid for travel to Europe. If you're planning on driving, you'll need to check if you have the right documents to drive. And make sure your travel insurance covers all your healthcare needs. To keep your trip on track, check what you need to do at gov.uk/Brexit. Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October.
MLB is right here on TuneIn.
A swing and a drive to right field. That's it. Well, Ramirez back, and that ball's gone.
And to find it all, you need to search MLB on TuneIn.
By the wall, out of here.
Home and away calls are a click away on TuneIn Premium.
Get social with TuneIn. Follow TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest and greatest audio happenings across the app. Explore exclusive content.
It's called Indie.
Learn about the hottest new podcasts.
The Nostalgia Mixtape, a new podcast hosted by yours truly, Savannah Shroudy.
And get alerted when the big game's about to begin.
This Sunday is Championship Sunday, when we'll find out which two teams are going to play for the Lombardi Trophy.
Add TuneIn to your feed and be in the know when it matters most.
NFL fans, football lives on TuneIn Premium.
Wait, the pro size, no, the ham size. He breaks three down to the 5. He's in. Touchdown!
Tonight, TuneIn has your Monday Night NFL football with the Cleveland Browns at the San Francisco 49ers. Kickoff at 8:15 p.m. Eastern.
Trying to dive. Touchdown. 20 to the 15 to the 10. 5. Mike Evans. Touchdown.
At home or on the go, hear the home and away call of every NFL game this season on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
The Better Network is now on TuneIn. This is Brian Musburger. Search the Better Network. That's the BETR Network. And then let us get you better prepared to better enjoy the day in sports. The NFL, college football, basketball, hockey, baseball. Sharpen your edge. The Better Network is now on TuneIn. Be better informed. Be better prepared. Search the Better Network. That's BETR.
All right, welcome back in. Good morning. Though we certainly talk about stocks a lot here on CNBC, remember this important point. It is not just Wall Street that is feeling the pinch of the ongoing U.S.-China trade war. Farmers and companies in America's heartland also getting the squeeze. And by the way, some rough weather not helping things either. Frank Holland joining us now from East Moline, Illinois. Good morning, Frank.
Hey, good morning, Brian. You know, farm machinery shipments, they totaled $22 billion this year. Big number, but that's still an 18% decline from 2014. And major manufacturers like the iconic John Deere, they're feeling the impact. Deere says its agriculture division is down 6% last quarter. It's also announced layoffs here at the factory right behind me where it makes farm equipment. Caterpillar also saying sales of tractors and combines, two essential pieces of farming equipment, those sales are down for the first half of the year. The wet weather here in the Midwest, flooding and rain, a big factor. Also, the ongoing trade war. We've been talking to farmers here in the Quad Cities like Phil Four, a sixth-generation farmer whose cash crop is soybeans, and he owns 20 pieces of Deere equipment. He says he's really holding back on buying or financing any new equipment this season.
I'm just trying to take a wait-and-see attitude, maintain the old equipment, and then if times improve, we'll roll into some newer tractors or combines.
We've backed off on any capital purchases of anything very high dollar at all. We're going to postpone anything in the future for probably a full year, possibly 2 years out, and just maintain the line that we now have.
And Brian, the willingness of farmers to make big capital investments like buying tractors and combines, well, that's plummeted over the last 3 months, according to the Agriculture Economy Barometer put out by Purdue University. Coming up in a few days on Thursday, we're going to get a better reading of just how bad the situation is for these farm machine makers, where the September numbers for farm equipment sales are going to come out coincidentally on Thursday, the same day that U.S.-China trade talks resume. Back over to you.
Hey, Frank, are there any other factors that might make farmers feel a little more confident about buying some new equipment right now?
Yeah, Brian, absolutely. We talked to these farmers. They say a more optimistic hog forecast over in China. The hogs over in China, the herd is down about 50% this year because of African swine fever. And in China, they buy a lot of soybeans and a lot of corn to use as hog feed. So if that situation somehow can turn around, well, these farmers will feel a lot better about buying those tractors and combines.
Once again, it is pork that saves the day. Frank Holland in East Moline, Illinois. We'll see you all day. An important story. Frank, thanks for being there. See you soon.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, still on deck. Another shoe dropping in the impeachment inquiry into President Trump and that now infamous Ukraine phone call. And later, no ice, no glass, no bitters, no problem. The latest high-end whiskey craze that apparently is sweeping somewhere. We'll tell you about it. It's a little weird. Worldwide Exchange returning right after this.
There's golf.
Where they're mending fences in the Highlands or on a building site in Cornwall. There are thousands of hard-working Ford commercial vehicles in the UK. It's why we're truly the backbone of business. And now we'll give you £1,000 off the recommended retail price if you test drive and purchase a vehicle during our Backbone of Business dealer event from the 11th to the 21st of October. That'll really get your business moving. Ford commercial vehicles. The backbone of business. Search Backbone of Business to learn more.
At participating dealers, exclusions apply.
Where they're mending fences in the Highlands or on a building site in Cornwall. There are thousands of hard-working Ford commercial vehicles in the UK. It's why we're truly the backbone of business. And now we'll give you £1,000 off the recommended retail price if you test drive and purchase a vehicle during our Backbone of Business dealer event from the 11th to the 21st of October. That'll really get your business moving. Ford commercial vehicles. The backbone of business. Search Backbone of Business to learn more.
At participating dealers, exclusions apply.
Whether mending fences in the Highlands or on a building site in Cornwall, there are thousands of hard-working Ford commercial vehicles in the UK. It's why we're truly the backbone of business. And now we'll give you £1,000 off the recommended retail price if you test drive and purchase a vehicle during our Backbone of Business dealer event from the 11th to the 21st of October. That'll really get your business moving. Ford commercial vehicles. The backbone of business. Search Backbone of Business to learn more.
At participating dealers, exclusions apply.
All right, welcome back. 5:17 here on the East Coast in the morning, 5:17 p.m. There in Hong Kong, as you can see, dusk beginning to set in. It certainly looks peaceful from a distance. But over the weekend inside Hong Kong, there was no sign of peace. Protesters defying government bans about wearing masks over the weekend. Pro-democracy demonstrators turned out by the tens of thousands. Now, many hid their faces, and they were met with tear gas. There were no obvious signs of violence against police, but many protesters ignored the gas, either dousing them with water or tossing them right back at the police. Hong Kong leaders had invoked colonial-era emergency powers to threaten protesters with up to a year in prison if they hid their faces. Police say they were participating in unlawful assemblies, and they warned protesters to leave immediately or face what they called, quote, dispersal operations. All right, on deck, fear overtaking greed. How investor sentiment about IPOs could be a game changer for the markets going forward. Plus, your morning RBI. And the most random but interesting thing that you're going to hear today has to do with how all-day sausage is making investors go hog wild. Stick around.
Sometimes the pressures of...
Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. Brexit will bring changes that affect businesses in many ways, particularly if you buy from EU suppliers, sell to EU customers, provide services to EU clients, and receive customer data from other businesses in the EU. Businesses need to prepare. Find out how at gov.uk/Brexit. Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October.
You're 169 in the queue.
I proposed on the 169. She got offered the next stop.
You're my 169th greatest lover.
The number 169 never screamed going places until now. Get the Toyota Aygo X-Play for only £169 deposit, then £169 a month with 0% APR representative. Just go. Aygo.
0% APR representative on new sales of Aygo X-Play over 48 months. £169 per month. Customer deposit of £169 when proposed and approved via Access Toyota by 31st of October 2019. £3,487 and 50p optional final payment. Subject to status to over 18s. Indemnities may be required. Conditions apply. Toyota Financial Services.
Hello, Vitality Health Insurance.
Oh, hi. Is it true if I join Vitality I get de facto 5-star rated cover, can speak to a GP 24/7, get rewarded for staying active with things like Starbucks coffee, get a little sausage dog to live with me, and you could beat my current premium by up to 10%?
Absolutely. Except one of those.
It's the dog, isn't it?
Yeah.
Time to review your health insurance. Just search Vitality Health. Vitality. Positively different. Minimum monthly premiums, terms and conditions apply.
The nights have started to draw in. And at DFS, we know that can only mean one thing. Everyone will want to spend more time at home, getting nice and cozy. Ah, you can't beat it. That's why all our sofas are handmade to order, and many are guaranteed to be delivered in time for Christmas. So you can look forward to cozying up this winter, knowing your new sofa won't let you down. DFS.
Stuck in traffic during the big game? With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to your favorite NFL team on the go. No TV required. Even during rush hour, you won't miss a single touchdown. Listen to the NFL on TuneIn Premium today.
Couldn't. Here's a swing and a drive deep to right field. Looking up. Goodbye, baseball.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off homers, follow TuneIn on social media to discover the latest and greatest in live sports.
With the 24th pick in the 2019 NFL Draft.
From live reminders that the biggest MLB games are on the air, to recommendations of the best new sports talk shows and podcasts.
He's going to be fine. He's going to be good right away in 3 years.
Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
All right, welcome back in. Good morning. Good morning, Washington, D.C. Sun not up yet. Well, a second whistleblower is now coming forward with new details on President Trump's dealings with Ukraine, this time with apparent firsthand knowledge of the allegations. NBC's Tracy Potts joining us now with more from Washington. Good morning, Tracy.
Brian, good morning. That could be the key here. In fact, it could be a game changer in this impeachment inquiry if, in fact, the second person has his or her own knowledge of what was said on that phone call between President Trump and Ukraine's leader. An attorney for the original whistleblower now claims to represent a second person with firsthand knowledge of the phone call where President Trump allegedly pressured Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden.
Why should I care at all what his perspective or his opinion and judgment of this transcript is? You and I can read it.
The White House says it doesn't matter how many people decide to call themselves whistleblowers. It doesn't change the fact that he, President Trump, has done nothing wrong. The president tweets this new whistleblower also has secondhand information. Democrats insist there's evidence to support the original complaint.
The whistleblower complaint has been corroborated by information in the public domain every step of the way. This is as serious as it gets.
So 4 current and former State Department officials will tell their stories to Congress, including the European Union ambassador, implicated in text messages released last week.
What I certainly hope to hear is how he can explain his behavior in pressing the new Ukrainian president to do something of such a sort of nature.
His deposition is set for Tuesday. Meantime, we are continuing to follow what's happening with this second whistleblower, Brian. Turns out the second whistleblower is not expected to file a separate complaint.
All right, wrapped into that one complaint, I would imagine. Tracy Potts in Washington, D.C. Tracy, thank you very much. All right, so let's get a check on this morning's other top headlines outside of the world of money and business. Get you set up for the news day. NBC's Frances Rivera in New York with those. Good morning, Frances.
Hey, Brian, good morning to you. We start with breaking news overnight. Police have arrested one of the 2 suspects in a shooting that left 4 dead in a Kansas City bar. Police first responded to a fight at Tequila KC and then again to a mass shooting just after last call Sunday morning. 4 people were killed and 5 others were wounded. 1 suspect is in custody and police are still searching for the second. In a major policy shift, Turkey is moving forward with a military operation in Syria. Turkish military convoys have been bringing troops and equipment inside the country's northern region. The White House says the U.S. will not be involved. More than 1,000 U.S. troops are deployed in northeastern Syria and work with Kurdish troops against ISIS. It's now up to Turkey to figure out what to do with ISIS fighters that have been captured in the area. In an effort to reduce tensions, President Trump spoke to the Turkish president about establishing a safe zone east of the Euphrates River. The 2 leaders are set to meet next month in D.C. Celebrities including Oprah Winfrey, Spike Lee, Whoopi Goldberg, and many more walked the red carpet to celebrate the grand opening of Tyler Perry's new production studio in Atlanta. The 330-acre complex sits on what was once the Fort McPherson Army Base. And Brian, for Monday morning, those are your headlines.
Everybody's moving south and west, except for us, apparently, Francis. Thank you very much. All right, coming up, an upgrade for Uber just crossing the desk. We'll tell you who and by how much coming up. Plus, how Tim Cook won the ear and the support of one Mr. President Trump. Those stories and more on Worldwide Exchange. Comes right back.
Whether your beauty routine is...
When travelling from the centre of London to the heart of Edinburgh, what's best? A plane or an LNER train? Well, there's a massive queue at the airport, so 1-0 trains. Free Wi-Fi on board, 2-0. Actually, the airport's miles away, and you have to take your shoes off in security. Minus points for planes. So, it looks like an LNER train is the winner. Thanks for playing, planes. That's London to Edinburgh for 4 hours and 19 minutes. Book direct at lner.co.uk.
The chance of being hurt while using a leaf blower is about 3,000 to 1. Ooh, unlucky. Never mind, at Curry's PC World, there's a 1 in 10 chance to get half your money back on all 2019 LG OLED TVs. Like the LG C9, described by Which as simply the best. Get blown away with Apple AirPlay, Google Assistant and Amazon Alexa built in. And there's up to £500 off. So the question is, are you feeling lucky? At Curry's PC World. T's and C's apply. GB16 plus. See currys.co.uk.
You're 169 in the queue.
I proposed on the 169. She got for the next stop.
You're my 169th greatest lover.
The number 169 never screamed going places until now. Get the Toyota Aygo X-Play for only £169 deposit, then £169 a month with 0% APR representative. Just go. Aygo.
0% APR representative on new sales of Aygo X-Play over 48 months. £169 per month. Customer deposit of £169 when proposed and approved via Access Toyota by 31st of October 2019. £3,487.50p optional final payment. Subject to status to over 18s. Indemnities may be required. Conditions apply. Toyota Financial Services.
Hello, Vitality Health Insurance.
Oh, hi. Is it true if I join Vitality, I get de facto 5-star rated cover, can speak to a GP 24/7, get rewarded for staying active with things like Starbucks coffee, get a little sausage dog to live with me, and you could beat my current premium by up to 10%?
Absolutely. Except one of those.
It's the dog, isn't it?
Yeah.
Time to review your health insurance. Just search Vitality Health. Vitality. Positively different. Minimum monthly premiums, terms and conditions apply.
Red arrows, futures pointing to another big drop to begin your week. Dow futures off triple digits. It is fear versus greed and a battle playing out amid IPO investors right now. And the winner could have a big impact on the broader market. Plus, who doesn't love breakfast for breakfast? But what about breakfast for dinner? McDonald's investors have been loving it. We'll give you the answer. It's your RBI on this Monday, October 7th, and you're watching Worldwide Exchange on CNBC.
Does anybody really know what time it is? Does anybody really care?
All right, welcome back and good morning. Thanks for being with us on this Monday morning here on CNBC. I am Brian Sullivan. Hope you had a great weekend. Well, it's not looking like a great start to the week for the global markets. In fact, Dow futures, they are down 146 points right now. Remember what we told you at the top of the 5. If you missed it, it was this, which is what we've seen the last couple of months is that whatever the futures trend is during this program, it tends to accelerate in that direction absent any big change in data or market moving headline. And that's exactly what we saw. Futures down about 100 points about 30 minutes ago. They're now down about 145 points right now. And of course, after what was a wild week with big early drops last week, but we came back. And in fact, you wouldn't know it necessarily given what was happening at the beginning of the week. But the NASDAQ and NASDAQ 100 actually finished last week higher. Bad start to the week right now this week, at least indicated. No big economic data or earnings out today. It ramps up at the end of this week. And also earnings season really kicking off next week. 10-year bonds at 1.52%. So the yields have come down in the last couple of days. In Asia, we saw the Chinese and Hong Kong markets both closed for national holidays. Japan did trade, and it traded down. We saw the South Korean market rise very fractionally. And in Europe, kind of a similar story. Yeah, a lot of red on the screen, but it's not big moves either way. You can see the major markets down, but we're talking about 1 or 0.2%. All right, a big analyst upgrade coming into Worldwide Exchange right now. Citigroup upgrading Uber. They're taking it to a buy from a neutral. Now, they keep their same target, $45. The analyst says, well, overhangs from the IPO will likely persist. They think that third quarter earnings may, quote, refocus the story, particularly on ride fundamentals. The analyst at Citi also believes revenue growth will accelerate, and the next earnings could make investors a little more favorable on Uber stock. At $45 price target, by the way, is 50% higher than Uber shares are right now. Uber getting a little bump on that upgrade, up 2.5%, but it literally crossed just a couple of minutes ago. Well, speaking of IPOs, as stock futures point to another rocky start for the overall markets, some are now looking to one area of the market possibly to blame for stock sour performance as of late, and that is the IPO market. According to data from Dealogic, shares of technology startups and other companies that went public in the U.S. this year are trading roughly 5% above their offering price on average. Yes, that's positive, but it is far short of the S&P 500's nearly 18% jump. Let's take a look now at some of the worst and most notable debuts of the year. Smile Direct down 34%. Uber, we mentioned it, 33% down from its IPO. Lyft, Peloton, Slack, and I guess the real looks pretty good, being down only 1% from its IPO price. Joining us now to talk more about this is Arash Massoudi. He is corporate finance and deals editor at the Financial Times, and he joins us this morning. Arash, great piece. So for our viewers who, couldn't read it, and shame on them, but they couldn't read it, what is the overall takeaway between the IPO market and maybe the macro market in general?
Well, I think what we're seeing is something that is quite strange, right? These companies that are IPOing are supposed to be the most interesting, hottest companies in the global economy, and when they come to market, it's supposed to be this opportunity for investors of all shapes and sizes to get their hands on them. And what you're seeing is the public markets, which are supposed to accept this product, which is brought to them by investment banks, with open arms, fundamentally reject them. And the stuff you showed on the screen just now doesn't even capture the worst one of all, which was WeWork, which wasn't just a rejection of the IPO, which they had to pull. It was a fundamental rejection of the concept, the valuation, everything that went along with it. And so what you're seeing is the ones you showed on the screen there, down Uber, Lyft, Peloton, Slack. These are supposed to be the kind of most exciting new companies in our economy. And at the same time, they're not performing anywhere near what their shareholders would have wanted them to do when they listed. And what's happened is basically the private markets have sucked out all of the juice there are in these companies, and they're coming to the public markets at a valuation that investors just fundamentally are rejecting. And so this distortion between the pull and push and pull between the buy side and the sell side is really playing out in these last few weeks. And how that ties into the macroeconomy is, as you pointed out, the S&P 500 and some of these other more normal companies are performing totally fine with respect to share prices. So you're seeing the kind of exciting companies having been overhyped and being rejected, and some of the more sort of run-of-the-mill companies that we're all familiar with doing much better.
Yeah, is there necessarily a reason why you guys have dug, when you dig into this, Arash, is there a reason why these IPOs have done so poorly? Is it just that investors don't like the stock, or the viewpoint that the private markets extracted most of the gains beforehand, or the bankers screwed up in initially pricing it?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look at the IPO market as a power struggle between buy side and sell side, the sell side had the upper hand here. They had these companies that they kept private for very long periods of time, which they had time to build, which private market investors bid up through various rounds, who we thought, there was, 6 months ago, every piece would have said that the private markets are the hottest place in the investing world. Now in the public markets are where kind of companies are pawned off onto retail investors. And what you saw with WeWork was actually the public market saying, this thing is just completely illogical. It's not something we can purchase at this price. And the investment banks, which talked about valuing this in their pitches to WeWork at between $50 and $100 billion, and its valuation of $47 billion, SoftBank cut by at least a third, if not more. And that is something we really haven't seen in the last decade in terms of a rejection of a company of that size that brought it down to earth. And I think that's had a knock-on effect across the board. Several IPOs were pulled, including Endeavor, which was the William Morris talent agency, which had UFC. You had Uber continue to struggle. And what's happened is all these companies that were being sold on growth as the value in it are now being measured for profit. And that's exactly what happens in IPO markets, is when investors say, okay, this growth story stuff is all hype, I need to see actual profits, and these companies are struggling to deliver on that line, and investors are rejecting them. And that's the main thing that's happening here.
Basically, profits are back. They matter.
Profits matter.
Yeah, and we look out at the IPO calendar going forward. Does it look any better, Arash?
Right now, I'd say that, I'm just back from New York. The sentiment is very negative around the market. Everyone is talking about WeWork. And until that dominates the discussion, I think there's going to be a lot of skepticism. So what happens is, what banks do basically to rebuild confidence in the market is they have to give up. So if you're the next batch of companies coming out, the banks will basically advise you to go at lower than you hoped valuations, because they have to give something up now to the buy side. And so that push and pull has to readjust, and it often takes a little bit of time. So the next few companies out in the coming weeks, they're going to have a much lower valuation than they would have been promised 6 to 12 months ago when the banks pitched them.
All right, good stuff. A good story. And by the way, Arash, next time you get on a big jet and fly across the ocean, let us know. We'll have you on set. Don't be a stranger.
Thanks, Brian.
Arash Massoudi of the FT. Good story there. Have a great day. All right, an interesting investigation in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend on a rather unlikely friendship. The headline, How Tim Cook Won Donald Trump's Ear. Now, according to sources close to the Wall Street Journal, with the threat of tariffs looming and Apple standing to lose billions of dollars, Tim Cook reached out to one of his most important White House contacts, Jared Kushner. Joining us now to talk more about this and maybe the lesson it provides in leadership is Yale School of Management's Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, also, of course, a CNBC contributor, one of our favorite guests. Jeff, great to see you early on this Monday morning. What did Mr. War Eagle, the Auburn graduate, Tim Cook, get right about his dealings with the White House?
Thanks, and thank you so much for the favorite guest, or one of the favorite guest celebrations. So you just made my week. Is something that Tim Cook does is he understands that President Trump, you don't reach him by hectoring him with email tweet storms to responding to him, and certainly with a lot of public grandstanding. But also, surprisingly, despite the legions of K Street lobbyists, he doesn't respond to that well. You know, when people talk about who from industry is represented in the Trump administration and issues that they're concerned about independence, when it comes to Apple, he doesn't rely on third parties to speak for him. He goes directly, and that plays really well to President Trump. It's personal diplomacy. It's a one-on-one, mano-a-mano. That's what President Trump responds to. And Apple, in fact, pays far less for lobbying than many of its competitors do.
Yeah, what a lesson, right? As opposed to hiring these high-priced K Street firms, not that there's anything wrong with the lobbying profession, Tim Cook doing a lot more subtly, I guess. In one instance, the Journal points out that Cook and Trump had some kind of a conversation. He convinced President maybe to roll back planned tariffs on the iPhones. And a day or two later, Apple just happened to put out a press release saying, wow, look at the kind of growth that we're seeing. I mean, it didn't take more than a dinner and a press release to maybe move the markets.
No, it's something that people don't understand about President Trump, and obviously with a lot of the negative swirl we see right now of some bad choices from the White House, driving himself into a corner, that it's hard to believe that President Trump actually, when he doesn't feel humiliated, is open to honest debate. He just doesn't want to be embarrassed. He doesn't want to be humiliated. And when Cook, very early on, Tim Cook, met with him soon after election, I ran into several CEOs, actually, the day of that meeting. Larry Page of Google was another. Several met very successfully and had a great discussion. Of course, Steve Schwarzman of Blackstone, Ginny Rometty of IBM, and a few others, Marilyn Houston of Lockheed, have had a good rapport by just explaining issues quietly to him. The one-on-ones work especially well, but it's as recent not just as going back to 2016 or we saw a lot of business community being divided up, Merck versus Pfizer and Ford versus GM, as Trump likes to play one off against each other in the spring of 2017. Cook stayed out of that, talked individually about issues, and as recently this past August, with trade sanctions arising, higher tariffs, he managed to get a carve-out again about the iPhone, and it's remarkable how he has managed to get a special relationship. Jared Kushner has helped a lot, too. He's gone directly to Kushner, and this is not with any money being exchanged. It's with forceful arguments about the trade. I think China is probably the third largest market to sell into Apple, and to sell for Apple. I think the U.S. is probably around 40-some% to 42%, and Europe maybe 24, 25, and China's around 20%, and that's very important Apple revenues.
Yeah, but how has Cook been able to walk that line? Because you've seen it, the Journal points it out. I mean, if we had a CEO come out and tweet out, I think President Trump is not terrible. I mean, just something as innocuous as that. In this environment, cancel that company would be trending on Twitter immediately, right? It's like if you associate yourself with the White House, everybody comes out and says, down with that product or service. How has Tim Cook been able to walk that line where people aren't saying, oh, shame on Tim Cook and throw away your iPhone for the Google Pixel?
No, that's a really good point, because more than 97% of political contributions coming from Apple employees have been going to Democrats. And for that matter, most of the U.S. business community, which is largely Republican, so around 70% Republican for major business, a little bit more than that, were not supportive of President Trump in 2016. And again now, in our surveys, most are not voting for his reelection. Nonetheless, and Tim Cook doesn't get political, but he also doesn't come off as haughty. And whether or not either side of the aisle finds us with Tim Cook, he talks with them rationally. There's not name-calling. And he takes an independent position on a couple of issues that were counter to the Trump administration, such as on immigration policy early on was one, and then climate issues, climate concerns where he has put out messages to employees, but he would go to the White House first, often Jared Kushner, and give them a heads-up warning and wouldn't make it personal, but explain why they take a different point of view. And that's been very effective, the advance warning. Plus, he has celebrated the administration sometimes as that Apple has benefited from things that probably Apple was already doing, like a $350 million advanced manufacturing fund for investing in the U.S. The Mac Pro has been made in Texas, but it's being migrated to China. But he's been managing to make commitments on how we're investing in workers here in the U.S. in a way that doesn't seem like it's anti-American or an affront. So some of that's helped. And the tax policy, he said that really helped put another, $250 million into the U.S. that was probably already being invested here. He gave Trump credit for it.
Yeah, he's figured him out. I mean, the bottom line is the Southern gentleman, right? The Alabama guy, he's figured it out.
This helps. It doesn't mean he always agrees, but he finds a way to thread that needle. You know that old expression: you don't spit in the wind, you don't step on Superman's cape, and you don't get in a tweet storm with President Trump unless you really have a hard rock to throw.
Yeah, there you go. And Tim Cook has done it very gently, and maybe a lesson for other CEOs, and just a lesson for the internet. All right, Jeff Sonnenfeld, always a pleasure,
thank you very much.
friend. Thank you very much. All right, coming up. Fined for wearing an Apple Watch? What would Tim Cook say? We'll tell you why one NFL star is being forced to pay up this morning, and then later, why one little move by America's biggest fast food chain has investors licking their chops over the past year. It is your RBI. It's random, it's interesting, and it sounds pretty good right now. It's delicious. We're back right after this.
I'm 52, but in my mind, I'm still 25.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like online skills tests, which let a candidate show that they are the right hire. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its cymbals when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are online skills tests.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring. Visit Indeed.com/try today to try skills tests for free today. Terms and conditions